This week, Alex Chaveriat, Chief Innovation Officer at 2X Security, joins us for an interview where he tells us how hacking naked changed his life. Then I'll take you through attack surface mapping with AMASS in our technical segment. In the security news, President Biden issues a 34-page executive order on cybersecurity. Did you hear the pipeline got hacked? I don't know if anyone heard that yet. New old Wi-Fi vulnerabilities. Get this. Apple didn't want to talk about a malware attack that exposed its users. Fake Amazon review database. Why ad hoc scanning is not enough. Distroless Linux. Wormable Windows bug. Could it be Code Red 2.0, perhaps? The crypto wars continue, and more. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Cybercriminals are using social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who has first-hand experience and can tell you the difference between a chickpea and a garbanzo bean. Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome to Paul's Security Weekly. This is episode number 694, being recorded on May 13th, 2021, here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left on the screen remotely is Mr. Larry Pesce. Larry, welcome.
Howdy.
What's going on, Larry?
Same stuff, different day. Fauci ouchie number 2. And feeling a little dumpy, but yeah, that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. It's a good thing. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Good to be here. We're having a glorious day over here and looking forward to a fun evening.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us with his hack naked shirt on backwards.
Yeah, but it says hack naked, and I didn't know if the front was corporately acceptable anymore. So this is what you get, and it's the most important anyway because it's got the definition.
That's right. Sporting the hack naked shirt.
Don't go too far up, Jeff. Don't go too far up.
Oh yeah,
pants.
Not wearing pants.
Mr. Tyler
from the waist down.
Tyler Robinson is here with us, back from vacay. Tyler, welcome.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed my Puerto Rican experience, except I didn't get to see Carlos. I was very sad I didn't get to meet up. But,
you have to go back. Quick announcements. Do you want to stay in the loop all things Security Weekly? Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe via your favorite podcast catcher or our YouTube channel. Sign up for our mailing list, join our Discord server, and follow us on our newest live streaming platform. That's right, we're on Twitch. If you have a specific guest or topic you'd like us to cover on one of the upcoming shows, we'll cover those guests. Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests. Complete that form, and we do review those suggestions on a regular basis. It says monthly, but sometimes it's monthly, sometimes not. Alex Chaveriat is a self-proclaimed information security geek who has experience in ethical hacking, cybersecurity, and penetration testing, and audiovisual design. He joins us today to talk about his choice of words when talking to with a prospective client earlier on in his career, and the truth that it revealed. Alex, welcome to the show.
Hey, well, I'm so happy to be here.
It's nice to have you. Alex, how did you get your start in information security?
Oh, goodness. So previously to joining a company, I loved reverse engineering and specifically video games. So the first exploit I did was in Unreal Tournament 2004, and that was crashing all the gamers who played at our college who were slowing down bandwidth. So that started with a little bit more on the malicious side in college, but then quickly found a love for information security and hacking, got a degree in network security, and then jumped right into doing security testing, penetration testing, grew into it, did consulting for almost a decade, and then started my own company about 3 years ago, and been going. We decided to launch it right in the middle of COVID, which was great, but we're thriving and it's awesome.
Fantastic. What was your first?
Just want to quick interrupt, youngster. I've been consulting for 25 years, so almost a decade doesn't sound like much to me.
I think it's actually probably close to about 14 years, 15 years. So more than a decade.
Well, that's totally
still nothing.
Sorry, I was reading. Did you say you launched what did you launch during the pandemic? I missed that part.
My own company. So I co-founded a company called 2X Security Group, and we launched it. We launched the company and we hired our first employee December of 2019. So it was a great time to start a company.
But actually, I think it is. I think it's good to start a company when maybe the economy's not doing so well. Although cybersecurity has been flourishing, but I think starting it in challenging times gives you a unique perspective and a good appreciation for when things are good, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had to plant and pivot a few times where we started and we're like, oh, this is the direction we're going to go in. We're going to be doing product security for XYZ company. Like they wanted to jump in, and we were building a platform to do third-party vendor risk management. And then overnight, both those contracts kind of stopped. And we decided, we're like, great, we're going to go back to our roots and help people build and orchestrate security programs. And it's been, as I said, it's been thriving. I mean, you get one client, and which leads to two, you get two, which leads to four, and now we're, I think we have like 40 clients. It's absolutely crazy.
Good for you, man. That's awesome.
What kind of challenges did you see, and what kind of pivots did you see the industry make that were both from a security standpoint, but also from just a general, like, hey, we're in a pandemic. What kind of things did you kind of notice as from the consulting side? Like, this is very interesting. We've seen a lot of companies kind of fail at this, and we've seen a lot of companies, like you said, thrive at a time when there's recession happening and people are losing jobs. So what kind of pivots did you see companies making that were both good for you and good for the industry?
Mm-hmm. I think most of everything we saw came down to two sides. I think most companies jump into the tactical things right away, like, okay, we're going to close systems, we're going to patch them, we're going to do all the tactical things. I think what has given us a lot of success is building everything based off of programs, whether it's the NIST framework, ISO, high trust, and going back to the basics, going, what is the framework? What are the framework controls? What are the policies you have which adhere to those controls? What are the procedures you're doing to satiate those policies? And then what is the evidence that you're collecting to satiate your procedures, which satiate the policy, which then fulfills the framework? Instead of just coming in and saying, okay, you have to do a pen test, you have to secure your SDLC, you have to do this, but coming up with a high-level program and then helping them organize that into consumable pieces. I mean, I know it's security 101, but it seems that every company we talk to is remarkably tactical in its approach and never tied it back to a full-on program.
Yeah, we definitely need more of that, for sure.
It's been that way for over 25 years.
I think
Jeff
one of the biggest...
Alex is taking it remarkably well.
I mean, I think one thing that probably the biggest one is we always start with that, like, again, KPIs and KRIs. What's your key performance indicator? What's your key risks? And setting up what are your company objectives and tying those to security. Because I don't care what anyone says, security doesn't have an ROI. You need to tie it to what the company objectives are. And then all of a sudden you can start justifying security. Like with product security, if our clients are demanding we have to be high trust, we can tie that to revenue goals. We can't do that if we just go tactical on everything.
Yeah, I think,
and I'm not really baiting on Paul, but that what Alex, what you just said is worth repeating. There is no ROI in security. On a good day, nothing bad happens.
Well, I think that, that certainly isn't a revenue generator, but measuring return is certainly something you can do with respect to security. I think if you wipe out a lot of your technical debt and you implement new products and services that are replacing the old and providing a better service to your customers, not only are you more secure, but you're also improving your bottom line, and not directly through security, which, I mean, that's I think what you guys are talking about. But I think there's an overarching strategy to more closely align security to the business rather than just making it a sheer cost center.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing which has given us a significant advantage as far as just new direction is we've started tying solutions, or we'll say like objectives within the company, to more, I'm going to say, articulated risk. So when we actually looked at all the tests, all the pen tests that we've done over the past, 15 years, and then even the ones in the industry, we always laugh. Like anytime I hear a security company going, oh, we have customized proprietary software and we come in with 0 days, like we always laugh. We're like, no, you don't. Like, no one's going to, even if you had a 0 day, you're not going to waste it on a company. So we actually just looked at them and said, wait, how are people getting in? Security awareness, things like that, but like credential stuffing. Like credential stuffing is such an obvious issue that has gone on, but there's not really an easy way of testing against it. So one of the first things we did for one of our clients was we purchased every breach database we could find. We added it to our databases that we had been maintained. We came up with, 28 billion records, organized it, searched through our clients, and then we set up, again, it's simple scripting. But one of the biggest things we did is we searched through it. What we call dredging. We dredged through, grab every password related to that client, which is related to an email, which they've had, grab that information, run it against their Active Directory, put it into a block list so those passwords can't get set, and then trigger resets to everyone who has one of those passwords. And it was something really practical we did, but it was a solution that doesn't seem to be out there. And I don't know why, because it seems like a 101 thing.
There are some attack surface management companies that in our recent test that do some of that. But how much of the breach data they're collecting and comparing it against. They did get one of our accounts that was in some breach data. But it doesn't sound as comprehensive as what, like 20, when you say 28 million or billion records?
A billion. But again, it includes that includes paste bins and buckets and a lot. I mean, there's so much. Like if you look at through Have I Been Pwned, there's so many sparse records in there. So 23 billion of actual records, we'll call them, but there's so much just junk data on top of it too.
Man, you guys are really, really good at regex and normalizing data. I'm just going to say, having done that myself, that's a pain in the ass.
You know what the hardest one is addresses, physical addresses we do too. There's no easy way of regexing them.
No, they're all formatted differently. And for the love of God, no one knows how to do an address in a standardized manner or comma separate anything.
One of in the way we do it is we organize it so they can understand it. But simple things we did is we'll take all the usernames associated with emails and run those. Do those exist in Active Directory? And we've had some, which is kind of amazing that the Active Directory accounts. But then there's other things we do, inject sparse records into their Active Directory and then monitor for those. But just simple regex remove tons of data. Is there an @ sign with a period inside the email? If not, just toss it away. But it was kind of fun doing simple regex and then eliminating just 10 million records. And it was wow, you felt really efficient. You wrote one script and then eliminated 2% of all your data. And you're wow, okay, I feel really good about that regex.
That's called accomplishment right there.
The acquisition of all that breach data, though, and maintaining it and keeping up to date in all these forums and personas, and that's a pretty big task. That's pretty cool. You guys are doing that for your Active Directory querying and the way you're doing this. Is this automated, and are you interacting using something like .NET or PowerShell to do this?
We've scripted it all ourselves so far. It's a combination of Lambda scripts, Python, and PowerShell. Amazingly enough, like a lot of it was just piecemealed together, like not piecemealed together, but like pulled a lot of open source projects on GitHub did what we wanted to, but they didn't string them together. Things like detect when a new password enters the Active Directory. Grab that and then convert that this way. Like most of the testing we're doing though, we push stuff down and then it all happens on the client site. So like the only thing we pull back to our platform would be just the statistics.
That's pretty cool. That's a great way to do that. And honestly, from a client side standpoint, like most clients are going to be much more agreeable to that than the opposite way, as some companies have figured out.
Yeah, like we kind of, I feel like I was never, so I have a different background than most people who were in this industry. Like I wasn't a software developer. I became one throughout, like had to learn code along the way. I was that weird person in security who didn't have a programming background. So now actually building software, I feel like I've done a bunch of paranoid things that probably aren't needed in my code, but I kind of just assume that every piece of it could be hacked at one point, so I just don't trust any of it.
I don't know if they're needed, but they probably need to be there, that people who have been developing software don't build in. I found myself doing, even with a software background, when I started developing our own internal application and users started using our software rather than just me using it for myself. I was like, wow, I got to code like really defensively, like really, do a lot of stuff that I normally wouldn't do, right?
Like the coolest package though that I found across all of this, and again, I don't know how public it is, but it's a la SQL. It is the coolest thing because we'll pull down packages of JSON and then you can query JSON as if it's a SQL database.
Oh,
so
cool.
You can do a remarkable amount of powerful stuff inside the client browser with a la SQL.
There's some gems in GitHub, and I think you're onto something there, Alex. Is kind of a good recommendation to our audience that you don't necessarily have to build all the software yourself. Like even in my tech segment that I'll give next, like I strung together a bunch of open source projects, and if you find the right ones, you can really accomplish some amazing things without really writing a lot of code at all.
Mm-hmm. Like I'll add to that, which I think is probably one of the coolest things I built, like in my tenure, is so before Death Star was a thing, we strung. We called it Project Loki, but essentially it was PowerShell Empire, it was NTLM Relay X, it was Death Star, and it was essentially you put all those things together, it's essentially a worm to just drop on the network. We did it through, you would send the client a Raspberry Pi, it would spin up a Docker image, which would add WireGuard. Then you essentially did like a reverse VPN over it, ran your Death Star, Relay X, Man the Middle v6, and you could send a Raspberry Pi and then automatically launch essentially the full attack, which then would launch shells. And every time it launched a shell, we'd get a Slack message back. But it was like the entire thing took maybe 4 hours to code, and it was just stringing all these awesome open source projects together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's what attackers are doing today. I mean, there are certain attack groups. I mean, they're basically just sitting back waiting for shells to be shoveled to them. And I think they're not even doing anything with them other than just selling them to the next ransomware group that is making a lot of money today, from what I've read.
I'm not sure if you have talked about this on the segment, but what's your consideration? What's your thoughts on GitHub's new security tool policy which they're talking about?
Yeah, we touched on it last week, and I think their language was something along the lines of any tool that had criminal or unlawful intent, and that was like their update. And I'm but how do you? So what is that? Okay, so if you have a knife, you can't have that because you could stab people with it, or you could chop vegetables too, but it's still a knife. How do you know what the intent is?
Yeah, I would imagine even PowerShell, there's so many PowerShell scripts which are just droppers, mm-hmm. which you could use for patching. You could also use it for all sorts of malicious things.
Yeah. I remember there was also some discussion in that particular stuff on the GitHub part about using GitHub and such as C2 So gathering commands and sending data there and so forth. Which, like, there was also some language about whether you're doing this with permission or not. I'm like, how are they gonna tell whether someone's doing it with permission?
It gives them a lot of latitude to do kind of what they want, where they see their discretionary function willing. I don't know. It's not great, I think, from a code platform, because code is not evil or uneval until it's utilized. And so that kind of is making that gray box black and white.
So it's interesting. So attrition.org made a pull request to the F-Secure Labs C3 repo and changed the README to say that this framework is not just for red teams as they had originally stated, but it's also a malicious used by malicious ransomware teams, and referenced the FireEye write-up on the dark side ransomware because it used C3 from F-Secure.
I mean, there's things like, I don't know, like there's things like Cobalt Strike, which have been used within APTs, but I've used it. I think it's a great C2 platform if you're looking for an easy one. But like the thing which I feel like there has to be a balance is there's also like full blown living off the land ransomware. Like DEF CON had one at DEF CON, I don't know, 28, 29. Or 20, I think it was 28, where it was a full blown living off the land ransomware with Bitcoin integration and everything like that, which was fully undetectable. Like, not fully undetectable, yeah, you can do integrity checking and all of that, but like it's on GitHub right now.
7-Zip just had the same thing, 2 weeks ago with the 7-Zip ransomware?
Yeah.
So
like, what's the balance there? Like, would you, again, someone has to make the decision, but can you throw just like if it's not on GitHub, it's going to be somewhere else. Then, like, let's use Unicorn. Unicorn's another great example of it is easily used for malicious to make payloads fully undetectable. Yet, it because it's on GitHub, Microsoft can just monitor the repo, and every time there's new pull request, they just generate new signatures.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because it's public, it makes it so much easier for them to make signatures.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's
be public somewhere else.
There's that, and I think it's just the fact that they wanted the latitude to make a decision on it without having to, tell everybody their intent and add it to the EULA, right?
Yeah. So, like, I mean, basically what that means is if it affects Microsoft products, they'll probably pull it. Just saying.
Do we have your word on that?
I think we've already seen that, right? Didn't they pull down the exploit code for one of the recent vulnerabilities in Exchange, right?
Yep.
Oh,
yeah, I see this being a problem.
Yeah.
There's going to be another company that stands up just like GitHub, or more GitLabs are going to happen, or there's just going to be a mass repo in Exodus that, again, like, what is it helping? It's just making it harder to build signatures and or utilize code. It should be gray. Like, code is not evil. Maybe there's a t-shirt there somewhere.
Mm. I mean, clearly some of the crypto miner stealers are like literally called crypto miner stealer. Like, can that live on GitHub or not? And is it about the name? Like, if my knife looks evil, does that mean it's bad?
What if you're using it to test to see if you can detect crypto miner stealers?
Right.
Or, again, like, there's a lot of use cases.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think Microsoft's been kind of big on you need to know what the exploit is and have the exploit code so you can, basically tune your defenses and detection. Because, I mean, they sometimes don't release stuff until, after they fixed it. But, the exploit's out there and they don't release a lot of details. I mean, they're not as bad as Apple. We'll talk about that in the news, but still. Alex, I wanted to transition to how we found you, because you made this really, really funny video. And, like, I mean, we can give you like a little background on Hack Naked. Larry, I think we were messaging on probably like ICQ or Jabber, or like before there was Slack and Discord.
It was like Jabber, or it definitely was not ICQ, but it was likely some other instant messaging, AOL Instant Messenger, Jabber, most likely Jabber, about like coming up with slogans for the show. And we got down the co-ed naked stuff, which led to nakedness and hacking naked.
We said hack naked, and we're like, yeah, we all like
That's
that.
it.
Like all the messages were like, yes. Larry's like, I'll do the logo. It wasn't that long after that, Larry. You're like, here's a logo. And I'm like, that's great. Let's print some t-shirts and go to ShmooCon. And that's basically how it started. I mean, there was literally that much thought put behind it.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of what we do, right? Or we used to do anyways. There wasn't a lot of thought behind it.
Yeah, it was just momentum, and we were going. And before we know it, we were at ShmooCon, and what was that, 06, Larry? 06 or 07? 06. I think it was 06.
I think it was 06, yeah.
We were at ShmooCon. Heidi was kind enough. I don't know why she did, only because she's awesome. She's like, yeah, you guys can totally like buy a booth and sell those Hack Naked t-shirts. Like, thank you. And we sold out every single one of them. And there began the whole Hack Naked thing.
So
and then
how did Alex come to us?
fast forward many, many years later, and we see a video from Alex. So, Alex, what was your story behind Hacking Naked?
Oh, it was mostly, I'll blame DEF CON. I'll blame you guys as well. I had just come back from DEF CON, so that's probably, the story was a while ago. It was at the beginning of my consulting career. I think it would have been, it was 6 months after I started with my last company.
What year do you think it was?
It would have been,
was DEF CON at the Rio?
No, it would have been before. No, it would have been 2009, maybe 2010.
Where was DEF CON in 2009 and 10?
Riviera.
It was Riviera.
Riviera.
Yep. And
Might have been the year we had the party. Yeah.
Yep.
So
we had the party. They had the skyboxes over CTF, and that was also where the life-size cutout of Larry made an appearance at the booth.
Yep. Could be.
So the story goes on is what happened was at this point I had traveled. So the company they were a consulting company. They were dedicated to a specific client, and then they did some remote work. And I joined, and they had me dedicated to this client, and I had traveled there 9 out of 11 weeks. So I was about to quit on the spot because, like most companies, they're like, "Oh, you only have to travel 25%, and that's it. You never have to travel any more than that." And then 9 out of 11 weeks, I was newly married. Like, I wanted to be home. I started questioning, like, what? Like, why do I even have a home? Like, I'm never there. So I got an opportunity. Funny enough, is actually my business partner now was the salesperson at the company, and that's how this was one of the ways we met and got along. He pulled me into an opportunity with this remote gig, and the client it represented so much, because if I would get this gig, it was going to be a lot of follow-on work. So I dialed into the conference call. And the call was going well, like typical scoping call. Here's what we're thinking about for the project. What do you need? What are you thinking? And it was actually a really cool product. What the product was is they built it in-house. It was for auditing connections. So they have these engineers come in. It was a hedge fund. They have engineers and traders come in and connect over to another system, and it would do screen recording, like an endpoint software. And what would happen at one point of the conversation, he said, "Oh, well, when you go to test this, it might have some issues, or it might trigger your antivirus, because what it's really doing is it's tying in here, and sometimes it triggers it." And at this point of the conversation, the guy was geeking out quite a bit. So it was like the video goes in like I just blew and said this, but it was like a calculated decision. But on the other side of things, it was kind of just like in my mind from DEF CON, thinking I was young. I'm hedging a bunch.
It sounded good in your head, and then once you verbalized it, you were like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that."
It was like one of those things. Like I for some reason, I thought it was like a known industry term. Like I didn't realize it had just originated and hadn't made its rounds yet. So without thinking, I was like, "Oh, don't worry, that's not going to be a problem. I hack naked." And it was just silence on the phone, like
awkward.
In that in that split second of silence, I remember all these things flying through my head, going like just like. Can I put it back?
My resume's not up to date.
like like he's gonna like this was the opportunity. I'm gonna be traveling again. It's not coming around. Like, God, what did I just do? And then a couple heartbeats go by,
Which
and then all of a sudden
it felt like minutes, though.
Oh,
right?
it was just it was so
Time slows
bad.
down.
And all of a sudden, the client just busts out laughing, and then you get this nervous laugh from the sales guy, like he's like, look, I'm not in the joke, and he's like, what? He goes, I think I know what that is. Like, I saw something about that because he was communicating with people who have just came back from DEF CON, and he had heard the phrase, and it started fun. So circling back around, this client, it became a client of ours. Like we have now had a relationship for 14, 15 years at this point from this conversation. But I said, hack naked, and then he busted out laughing, and the whole rest of the conversation was on DEF CON and Darknet and what challenges I was doing and what type of hacking I did. And it without a doubt, it was that phrase, the hack naked, hack naked, which we would have never talked about DEF CON and conferences and what projects I had worked on without that phrase. And the call was scheduled for 15 minutes and it went like an hour, just jumping into all the different challenges and hacking we had been doing.
That's really funny. I wonder if we had actually been publicizing the definition, or if it was just like a cultural thing that we explained to people.
Catchphrase.
Yeah. Well, we would explain the meeting to people, and I think it was Ed Scotus that kind of helped us shape the different meetings of, what other than sitting naked at your computer, that it means when you do I think it was Ed that, at least the way I remember it, that he said, it's when you're doing a pen, you don't want anything to inhibit you, and therefore it's more of the concept of being naked when you're doing a pen test, to make sure nothing like antivirus or firewalls or anything else gets in the way.
I mean, in the funny part is, even years later, I'm now still like, you do a pen test and you're using an AWS system, or EC2 system, going like, wait, shoot, I need to open up the full firewall. Yeah. I need to make sure there's no security on it. I need to make sure reverse connections will come back. I mean, the biggest change from that story, though, wasn't this relationship I kept with a client. It wasn't even the sale and then ended up moving on to more remote work. The change was, like, for some reason in my mind, a security consultant was someone who was very professional, always presented himself as just a security consultant in a tie, and always talked in rules and firewall rules and how you could better adequately fulfill your compliance needs. I don't know, like, and it wasn't like a geek. It wasn't like a hacker and just like a goofball, which is like, you go to DEF CON, that's like what we all are. And it changed the way I presented myself to clients moving forward. It wasn't like that stiff, like, dude. It was that, like, woo, let's talk about hacking right now, because, like, it's, how can you not be excited when you talk about it?
Yeah, and
I feel
I'd
like
say you got to be comfortable in your own skin.
To be naked?
I think
that makes sense.
I also hack in the nude, just to make sure that we all know that.
And I love that in the video.
Wait, what? You don't? Because I will fully admit that there have been some summer days when the air conditioning hasn't worked, and no air conditioning. Yeah. You got to make sure you're not sweating more than you need to.
The phrases that made it into the video and were actually said in real life was right after that moment happened. He started laughing, so that's the one part of the story which I was trying to remember back if I started saying them. I'm pretty sure I heard him chuckle, and then I doubled down, and I'm like, screw it. Okay, I'm screwed anyway. Might as well just go for it. I'm like, well, I just don't like anything to be between me and the code. I just like to be unfettered in my testing, and I find all of this just between us, it's just really restrictive when I get into the code.
It's awesome. Jeff,
I kind of feel like I want to see the sequel, and I'm envisioning kind of an "It's a Wonderful Life" kind of moment where you see the alternate reality if you had never been exposed to hack naked and you continued on as your vision that you just described as what a security consultant should be.
It's one of my favorite Star Trek: The Next Generation episodes, Jeff, where Captain Picard sees his life as if he hadn't gotten stabbed and gotten in the fight, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I was trying to think of other examples. That's one of them. There's others out there, but just sort of that. If you'd never had that aha moment, as it were, how different your life might be. Make it humorous. Make it a melodrama, but deserves to be made.
While you think about that, just if you haven't seen that episode of Star Trek, Captain Picard gets stabbed when he was younger because he gets into a fight. Later on in his career, when he's a captain, I forget what happened, but it has another medical issue that stab wound kind of comes back to haunt him, and he almost dies. In his visions, he's kind of regretting getting in that fight and being so kind of wild and brazen. Envisions his life, and he's not a captain in this life where he doesn't take as many risks, right? He's
like a yeoman or something.
He's like a petty officer, right? Yep. Equivalent in trying to appeal to Captain Riker in this alternate reality of like, hey, how could I like move up in the ranks? He's like, well, yeah, you kind of like, I don't know if you have what it takes, right? So something to be said for taking risks, right?
See, now letting my imagination run wild, I envision Alec in that alternate reality, clean shaven in a suit,
right, yeah.
Working for one of the big 5 firms, doing audit work, showing up on client site
on time, all the time, properly dressed. Yes.
Oh, probably would still be at General Electric. That's where I was working before that and left, and I probably would have went back there. I mean, this is like moment of truth, moment of honesty. Because if I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have gotten more remote work. I would have quit, and I would have went back to General Electric, which would not have been. There's a lot of things that would have happened, because if I wouldn't have stayed with this company, like my last one pushed me to go to DEF CON more and more and more. And they would pay for my all of it, but like at DEF CON, I ended up going on to win a black badge. I got involved with the Darknet contest. I helped run it with those operatives. That's also, if you there's another video I did on my YouTube channel, which was DEF CON 27. Gulo and Gowrie, who duplicated or forged the badge, the stone gem one with a urinal cake. And then, those guys have changed my life too. So, like, there's quite a few little chinks that would have happened if I wouldn't have just doubled down on Hack Naked.
I love how like the ridiculous phrase that we came up with on a whim back in the day has influenced you and likely others in the same kind of way. I think it's really funny.
Oh, like that phrase is like an official phrase. Like, it's defined. You can find it all online, but like it's weird when you hear it echoed back where you're like, oh yeah, just make sure you're hacking naked. Like I'm pretty sure it's on like the OSCP forums too, saying like, oh well, when you're doing your OSCP exam, make sure that you're hacking naked. Like, it's just like it's a coined term. It's part of the vernacular now.
That's really funny.
Jeez, and if I could only get an entry on Wikipedia, like, it'd be complete.
We do have an official U.S. trademark on Hack Naked.
Really?
We do. Yeah. Mostly so people, don't copy it, and so we can own it. But some people have asked to make T-shirts, and I'm like, that's fine, like whatever, But yeah.
Some people have used it in their own video podcast series. It's okay.
That's fine too. I think it's only if you're like monetizing it really becomes. You do have to protect the trademark to maintain it to a certain degree.
But yeah. Alex, that's not this kind of call. No, it's not about that.
No, it's definitely not. No, it's not about that.
Yeah, so you can't. You actually have to wear. You have to be fully clothed. Moving on. That's how the trademark works. You're not allowed to strip down.
Damn it! It's all ruined now.
That's awesome, though.
5 questions.
Yeah. Did you have questions, Jeff, or other people have questions?
I'm good.
I was just curious, what other cool projects are you working on? The data breach stuff is something near and dear to me, but I'm sure you have other stuff.
Yeah, the data breach one was a big one, and tying that all together. Probably the biggest thing we're working on right now is what we're calling Baker Street, which is our orchestration platform. So like there's tons of tools we all use, like Qualys and Nessus and security scanners and Tanium and CrowdStrike and all these different tools that all run independently, but there's nothing really binding them together. Like there's ThreadFix and there's a couple other ones, but what we've started doing, like we're solving our clients' problems and at the same time kind of solving other people's. But that's probably one of the cooler ones of taking all these different tools like a Dradis or anything like that, but instead of just generating paper reports, generating them into a framework so that it all binds together and you can audit everything, but tying this all back to that. What is the framework? What are your policies and procedures? What is your evidence? And then doing the automated evidence collection so that you can shove it all the way back to the framework. So less pen testing, but a platform which starts tying all this stuff together.
So could I characterize you as an integrator without any negative implication on that? Because it sure feels like you like to bring things together and make them cooler than they were when you found them.
Sure. I mean, I'm co-founder of the company. We were laughing before the call because we share a title of Chief Innovation Officer. And I said, yeah, you actually earned yours. I actually just gave myself mine as a co-founder. So I feel like I'm growing into it a lot more of innovation and integration.
We have to live up to our titles for each of our own benefits, right? Mm. We have to be good so that we can preserve the title of Chief Innovation Officer.
Well, I think some of it even comes down to like there's a lot, and again, not talking about, let's talk about mental health now. Like, I think there's so much burnout in our industry, and I think a lot of it's caused by not doing not spending most of your time doing what you enjoy. And I think that's one of my goals in my role is finding people on my team, finding clients who are struggling in their roles. Like, again, whether it's a client who's doing their own security stuff or whether it's compliance and framework and all of those things, there's things you hate doing, whether it's writing policies, creating PowerPoints, organizing vulnerability management data.
I mean, let's be frank, getting things to compile and build on Linux also contributes to our burnout as well.
But I think our goal as that innovation is finding ways to rip away the junk that no one wants to work on and is burning people out, and automating that best we can so people can then do more of what they love and less doing all the junk they don't. Even if that is like automatic PowerPoint creation, which is something we're playing with.
Yeah, I try and phrase it as automating the workflow or streamlining the workflow rather than just saying, well, you will use automation, because people get kind of weird when you phrase it that way. I'm like, you have a workflow. I want to automate as much of that workflow as possible. You're still responsible for the workflow. We still need humans involved, but I want to take away a lot of that burden, right? As it's kind of you were describing, Alex. I think that's really what the title means to me anyway.
No, I focus on, I want you to be able to do what you love and take all the other junk and help it into a workflow, or even just simple things. Like, again, I always felt like this is like 101, like, but it seems that a lot of big companies aren't doing this. Like building an SOP, like an actual step-by-step guide on how to here's how we make PowerPoints at this company. Here's how we present data at this company. And then once you write the SOP, you can hand it off to other people to learn from, and then you get to focus more on what you love doing. Like, I think that is the goal of my job, is to let people focus on what they love doing and move the other stuff off.
I loved the t-shirts and speaking of slogans, right? Like Hack Naked, that I'll replace you with a very small shell script. And I think it gives the kind of what we're talking about a negative connotation almost, but it doesn't have that negative connotation, because you're freeing up people to do what they love in replacing what they feel is boring with something. A shell script is kind of a phrase in that sense, but I think that's the heart and soul of it for me, which goes back to kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of Unix thing, right?
I remember I did have a question. I'm sorry.
Go for it.
I meant to ask it like a half hour ago, and I got swept into the conversation. I was curious, what kind of markets are you with your new company, are you finding success in? Do you cater to any particular industry?
The one we've been finding lately has been a lot of healthcare startups who are dealing with high trust. Like, that high trust is huge. And it's readiness, not auditing. We don't want to be an auditing body. Like, we have no want to be an auditing body. what we want to do is be that advisor to the client, but also help get them ready so that they're prepped, so that they can get high trust certification, they can get NIST or ISO. And when they get to that point, we can just get them ready, and we can be their guardian when it comes to that auditing body. But healthcare startups tend to be like a big one right now, which we love. Like, they're great. Like, they're great to work with because there's so much going on in their industry right now, and they need to be on high trust.
I was waiting for the follow-on PCI question, Jeff.
Well, there is no follow-on PCI question because he's clearly not working in the PCI world, and nobody wants to be an auditor. I'm with you on that. Sorry to all the auditors out there. We just lost 1% of our audience.
Damn it.
I mean, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is there is someone out there who loves paying taxes and loves dealing with health insurance. I am not one of them. That's not my favorite part of the job. But I hire people who love doing what they do and then push that stuff to them. So if someone loves PCI, they can take PCI. I will help you become PCI, but I really don't want to.
That's not people. That's not real. That's like a unicorn.
If I have to explain ingress and egress, firewall checking for your CDE, like, oh goodness. Scoping that out has been hilarious in some cases because we had a client who we had to define a CDE or your card holder data environment within a box. They had a physical box, and we had to declare the internal network, the internal parts of that was its own CDE. So it is remarkably obnoxious at times.
Wow.
Well,
this was not a
ironically,
Kubernetes box, right? Or
no, this was a physical box, and it turned out that we had to help them maintain documentation across, I think it was like 50,000 CDEs because that's how many they had distributed. This was years ago.
Yeah, the irony is you didn't have to because segmentation is not a PCI requirement.
wait, what?
You heard me.
It's not.
It's not a requirement.
No. People use segmentation to do scope control, don't they?
Yes, they use segmentation to relieve the burden of PCI and to limit the scope, and really the reach of PCI, which is ironic because PCI was written to be a measurement of an organization's security program overall, as it pertained to one specific type of data. But that's not the way it's been interpreted by many people.
That's the sticking point, though, right there. Is how is it interpreted? Because that's where I feel like oftentimes auditing feels like getting your house inspected. Is if they wake up on the right side of the bed, they have a good cup of coffee, then they're gonna give you very little hassle. Yet if you get a jerk, like, they're going to ding you on hundreds and thousands of things, and they can do that because there is a lot of interpretation. And that's one of the reasons why we always say, like, what is the controls in the framework? What is your policy? What is your procedure? And have all that documented, because then you can collect evidence, which then satiates the procedure, which satiates the policy. And then they're not necessarily auditing what you're doing, but your policies, and you can show your adherence to the policy. But again,
well, and that's exactly what PCI is designed to do. But the second biggest misunderstanding of PCI is that people think it's an audit process similar to other regulatory controls. But it's the big document that I have to fill out as a QSA is called an assessment. And it has all sorts of assessment and test procedures, and it really doesn't mention audit at all, but people kind of lump it into that category of audit, which is where it all begins to unwind as far as I'm concerned. But everything you're describing in terms of building processes, repeatable processes, make sure you have stuff written down so people can follow it. It doesn't mean that you pick it up and follow it every single time you do your job. it's there as a reference material. You know how to do your job, but if anybody ever had to step in and do your job, you have the steps written down so that they can follow something, and it's provable. That's the PCI that I do, and not everybody does it that way. Let's just say that.
Alex, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. This sounds terrifying.
3 words to describe yourself.
Ooh.
That's one.
I would say hacker, geek, excitable. I get freaking pumped about learning anything.
If you were to write a book about yourself, what would the title be?
I get freaking pumped about learning anything.
Naked urinal cake hacker.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
You already used the urinal cake. Darn it.
An Ethernet cable.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
Hackers.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead,
Fictional
fictional,
or
or
otherwise.
Ooh. Oh, this is going to be an awkward one. Laurel and Hardy.
Ooh,
Oh,
it's different.
Interesting.
First time we've heard that answer before. So, Alex,
good.
thank you so much for hacking naked. I'm glad I could help you out in your career, and thank you for coming on Paul Security Weekly tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Up next, stay tuned. We're going to talk about AMASS and attack surface mapping. Stick around.
When it comes to web app and API security, the choice is simple. You can choose Fastly's security solution that teams will actually use in full blocking. When it comes to web app and API security, the choice is simple. You can choose Fastly's security solution that teams will actually use in full blocking mode, just like 90% of their customers. Or you can stick with costly options that you probably just turn off. You can get Fastly's all-in-one platform that protects apps everywhere they live, however they're built. Or departments can agree to disagree. You can go to securityweekly.com/Fastly to learn more. Or you can just wish you had.
Media Ops presents DevOps Connect, May 19th at RSA Conference. Christopher Krebs, former director of the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, will keynote in a live fireside chat with host Alan Schimmel, which will also include Q&A with the audience. Besides an exciting keynote, you can also attend 30 other sessions featuring a powerhouse lineup of DevSecOps experts. Sign up for this free event now.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSA Conference 2021 All Access Pass. RSA Conference will be a fully virtual experience from May 17th through the 20th. Security Weekly will be live streaming Monday through Thursday in the virtual broadcast alley, interviewing some of the top sponsors and speakers for the event. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2021 and use the code 5U1Cyber. We hope to virtually see you there. Joff Thayer has joined us. Joff, welcome. Joff is on mute.
Yeah, there we go. Let's
Hey!
try. It's great to be here.
It's awesome.
Good to see everybody tonight.
Nice to have you. And for this segment, we're going to be talking about AMASS, a tool for attack surface monitoring. It's interesting, you can, I think a lot of the bug bounty kind of crowd is big on AMASS in this tool. I did interview Jeff Foley, the creator and maintainer, the lead maintainer, I should say. There's lots of contributors to the AMASS project on Enterprise Security Weekly. And it is kind of a dual use kind of thing. I think most people use it on more of a pen testing red team kind of style, but you can certainly use it to what I want to encourage more of is scanning your own environments and understanding your own attack surface. I think to get a better penetration test and keep tabs on things yourself so you can constantly respond to them. So AMASS, that's what it's used for, basically to discover the DNS infrastructure in your environment, primarily discover your subdomains. And I think, if you configure it properly, you'll probably, I think most people will find stuff you didn't know about. Like, I think almost 100% of the time, I've run it against stuff that I thought I knew about. I was like, wait a minute. I didn't know that was still hanging out there. Usually it's like stuff you're like, wait, I thought I took that down, but I really didn't kind of stuff. And those are those dusty corners that we talk about that can really hurt you when you face attackers and or pen testers. So AMASS is fully open source. It's written in Go. Again, there's lots of contributors to the project. Jeff did request that if you want to help out with the project, he's like, I kind of got like a lot of developers working on it because it's so popular, which is great. Awesome response from the community. He's like, I really need people to help write documentation. I'm like, you mean test? He's like, no. He's like, so many people test it all the time because most of the bug bounty hunters are running it all the time and giving him feedback. He's like, I really need people to help, update documentation and things like that. So diving into it, AMASS is really super easy to install. And it's interesting, along those lines, Adrian Sanabria had sent me a video from Linus Torvalds speaking at a conference, talking about one of the things he was talking about was Linux on the desktop and specifically applications. And in Linus's opinion, and he's like the most curmudgeon-y person like on the planet, but in his opinion, there's so many different ways to package an application for Linux, and that varies across all of the distributions, that it makes it super difficult for application developers to do that.
Snap is one of those where it packages software in a neat package. It also gives you some kind of like containerization and controls over what this running application, if you're using Snap, can actually access, which is interesting. And I think it's still kind of young. I think it definitely has potential to be the kind of standard Linux package manager, but anytime you use the word standard, especially in the context of Linux, the lines kind of blur and it's kind of a gray area. So I found that Snap it's getting there, right? But so to install AMASS, I mean, you could build it from source. And to be quite frank, like I haven't seen a reason to really build it from source to have to go to that level. You certainly could. I didn't for this exercise. You can also run it in a Docker container, which is another great way to run it. But I found this is Ubuntu 20.04. Snap install AMASS. It's as simple as that. It installs the latest version, and I checked to make sure that it was installing the latest stable version of AMASS, and that is in fact 3.12.3 as of this technical segment. Installs the latest version and it's just there. And I'm like, you know what? Sometimes the less time you got to spend messing with stuff to install it and configure it and get it running on your system, the better, because it allows you to dig deeper into the application. And that's exactly what I've done in the configuration. And I'm sure many of you are already customizing the configuration file for AMASS. You can do all of this on the command line through command line switches. I don't know about you guys, but like I found the configuration file for AMASS to be way easier. You got to spend some time reading the documentation and understanding like what all of the configuration file elements do and what it allows you to control. Once you do that though, I found like before I was in the config file, like my commands were like spanning multiple lines. And I found it easier just to go to the configuration file and swap those out based on what you're testing. If you got a config that works, because as you'll see, you're going to have to configure a lot of the kind of third-party providers, which is highly recommended for AMASS. Things like VirusTotal, which you have to go get keys for, and Shodan, and make sure you configure all those, and I'll show you some examples of that as well. So digging into the configuration file, you can run this in two modes, both active and passive. I kind of found that, let me see here. Can I scroll? It's giving me crap. It should be the, looks like it's like skipping, hold on, some of my configuration. Hang on. There we go. All right, so you get to see my lovely browser windows when I do that. So in the configuration, there's both passive and active as well. Passive just really doesn't make sense to me. Like I kind of like being able to pull the TLS certificates and attempting to do zone transfers. I think that's totally fine, especially I'm scanning domains that I own and or have permission to scan. So I always put it in active mode. I haven't found too much of like a performance hit in doing that. I find I just get better results when I run it in active mode. So I always configure it to mode equals active in the configuration file. I then give my output directory, and I give it kind of a standard directory for all of my output. That configuration has to be there. Otherwise, you have to specify it on the command line. So the ones that I highlight in bold, and you can grab this PDF file from our show notes page on our website, and you can get all these commands in the configuration file. So this PDF is available that I'm displaying on the screen. So make sure you configure an output directory. I then configure some standard resolvers. I found if I put too many in here, I tended to get errors. So I kind of just pared it down to a smaller subset of DNS resolvers to use for this test. And this is what we'll use to resolve those names during your test. I think you want to give it like at least 4 here. Again, if I expanded out this list to all of them, some of them I got errors on and stuff like that. And then you configure the scope. So you can pin it to specific IP ranges. So if you're doing like an external pen test, you might want to include the scoped range for that pen test that you're authorized to do in the scope. In this case, I didn't do that because I'm like, whatever, I'm not doing anything like heinous to these IP addresses. And I do just configure some basic ports there for it to find this infrastructure on. So these ports are open. It will use those to determine if that host is in fact alive or not. Then I gave it to the domains. This is one I had some like weird command line kung fu to get like a bunch of domains on the command line. I find it easier to just list them out in the configuration file. This wasn't the full list that I was testing with. I probably had close to 20 domains that I was testing when I was doing the evaluation of attack surface monitoring tools. So this is just kind of a subset. But I like so for each engagement, I would recommend, if you're doing this as a pen tester, or if you're doing this internally, just maintain a list of all your domains, stuff them in the configuration file. I found that to be the best and easiest way, because the more domains, the better, right? This does represent your attack surface, and that root level domain is really going to be the starting point for tools like AMASS and other tools that you would use in your attack surface monitoring. It does keep a graph database locally, so all of your results will be sent, if you configure it like I did here, to have a local database. The advantage with the local database, and I'll show you a really quick example, is you can do tracking. So you can run AMASS with one run, it'll save those results to a graph database. You go run it the next day, and you can run an AMASS command that will give you kind of a diff between those scans. So you can see if a domain doesn't resolve anymore, if that domain's IP addresses have changed since the last scan. So it'll give you the tracking results if you store it to a graph database. You can also send it to a Postgres database, and there's some different options there. But I find just setting local database to true did the trick for me. I did enable brute forcing. Otherwise, your results are kind of limited to just relying on the third-party kind of integrations from things like Shodan and the SSL TLS certificates. Enabling brute forcing gives you a lot better results. So I enabled that. I had it do recursive lookups as well. And I gave it just a basic word list file. 5,000 domains was pretty much the sweet spot for me in terms of performance. Obviously, if you're doing a pen test or working on a bug bounty, you can have word lists that go much higher. And there's tons of word lists out there for DNS subdomain brute forcing, which is essentially what it'll be doing. And they can grow exponentially in size. So actually, 5,000 was actually low in a lot of the databases that I found for subdomain brute forcing. I did enable alterations, so it will try like different types of subdomains. So like if it finds www, it may try www1 and things like that. So it does have some kind of like built-in automatic what they call alterations that will do that for some of the resolved names. And then you come down and you configure your sources. And this is where the config file is basically like required, is you're going to go out to a number of different sources. You're going to register for a free account. And these threat intelligence sources are going to be used when you scan to see if any of your IP addresses or domain names are in these particular sources. So it may take the IP address, cross-reference that with Alien Vault in this case, and vice versa. So I did, and Jeff totally recommends this as well. He's like, configure as many sources as you can, because these are just basically, most of them are free that he has in the configuration file. Some of them are paid, some of them are invite only. I configured just the free ones, and I probably increased my results by 25 or 30% just by going to all these websites. And it's kind of tedious, right? You got to go to all these websites, you got to register for an account. Then you have to verify your email address. And once you do that, you'll get your API key or your set of API keys. So I did Alien Vault, Binary Edge, Census, Cloudflare, Passive Total, Security Trails, Shodan, and URL Scan, and Virus Total, all in there. So I do, again, go to each one of these sites, register for an account, and this is where like storing all this in your config file is key, because all of your API keys and client secrets will be in there. Then if you want to test, like go on to your next pen test or bug bounty, you copy your configuration file, all your stuff is in there, and you just swap out your domain names and your config is preserved. Super easy. So then when it comes down to actually running AMASS, I did it like the wrong way. I'm missing a closing double quotes there, by the way. Because I was working with so many domains and there was a list of 20 of them, I used a little command line kung fu to just like basically take a file and dump the contents of that file as a parameter to the -D. That's not the way to do it. I like the config file better. So I told it to, let's see if I can remember what the command line options do. I meant to put that in the documentation. So -source or src will actually in your results file list out which of the sources found a particular DNS subdomain. So like if it came from Alien Vault, it'll list like, hey, I found this IP address in this subdomain, and that particular bit of information came from Alien Vault, for example. -IP puts the IP addresses inside of your results file as well. So you get a matching IP address and domain name in there. And then it lists the results. And like basically this could potentially be both IPv4 and IPv6 addresses that are resolving. And these are all of the subdomains that it's finding across all of these different sources that you've provided, including some built-in ones as well. So you find basically a lot of stuff. I mean, like anyone can take a bunch of domains and run it through and find the associated IP addresses and subdomains within a top-level domain. Then there is the track feature, which is interesting. So in the track feature, I think because I couldn't get it to like read via the track from the configuration file, and I didn't want it to do all the things I had configured in the configuration file, I basically just said, hey, in the domains that I have, run the track against them and compare my last couple of runs. And what that does is it tells you like things have moved, like this particular domain name has moved from this IP address to this IP address. It looks like in that case, like the IPv6 maybe didn't resolve or was taken out. So it can give you kind of a nice tracking thing. I think this is more for your internal use case where you're constantly testing the same set of domains over and over and over again. And then I decided to like really quick, and this is really quick and dirty, but it's funny because Alex kind of teed this up in the previous segment in stringing multiple open source projects together. I ran AMASS as I configured it with the configuration file, and I output it to a results.txt. And then I use a little bit more command line kung fu. I go through those results and I pull out just the domain names from that represent all of my targets that maybe I didn't know about before because it found some subdomain running some service that's hosted, who knows where. So I collected just the host names from the AMASS results. Then from there, I ran nmap against them, which is interesting because I couldn't figure out. I don't think AMASS actually stores like the port numbers. At least I couldn't figure it out from the documentation yet. If it actually tests those open ports and stores that in there. So I just ran a quick nmap scan against them, which is key for some of the next steps. So I basically scanned 8443 and 8080 on all the subdomains that I found. I did a simple SYN scan against them, and I outputted my results to an XML format. Then, since I haven't done this in a while, I had to find a good tool for doing screenshotting. I actually worked on some of these tools, actually helping out with some of the code behind them back in the day. But Eyewitness was the one that I found. And props to the people that wrote Eyewitness. It's a great project, and it worked way better than all those tools I used to try and test and get running back in the day. I didn't have it installed, so like I included the installation rate in here. So I basically cloned it, did the Python setup, it installed, and when you run Eyewitness, you can pass it your nmap XML results. You can tell it to hit the take screenshots --web and dump the results to a directory. It ran amazingly fast. I mean, there was probably 50 plus the host names in there. I mean, it ran super fast.
Don't you love that, right? Eyewitnesses, they've done such a great job, right? Trance's crew.
Yeah. What's his name? I should have had his name in here.
Yeah, it's Chris Trance's tool.
Chris Trancer. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we know Chris. Chris, you did a great job. Fantastic tool. And they were advertising some kind of conference or something, like after I ran it or built it or something. They had like this little like promotion in there. So definitely support the project because it ran really well. And you get HTML results with a screenshot of the website if it exists. It even takes a snapshot of the source code that existed on that front page. And you might be surprised as to what you find in your environment. I didn't put any kind of interesting results here. This is obviously our website that I found in the screenshot. But like all that, like putting together, I mean, discounting the time it took me to kind of read and understand how you build a configuration file for AMASS, that took me like less than an hour to basically install and run all those tools, string them together, write little tiny scripts to string them together, and ultimately come up with scanning all of your domains for subdomains and getting to a website where you can see a screenshot of everything that's on those sites. And what you'll find as a pen tester, as many of us know, is you'll find very interesting things that you're like, wait, why is that exposed? I didn't know I had that. Well, it was interesting. One of our sites was running some weird SQL. I don't remember what it was called. It was some light SQL kind of server. And when we looked at that, Adrian and I were like, we tested a whole bunch of tools for attack surface mapping and are starting to test tools in web app scanning and vulnerability scanning, and not many things actually found that so far. So like my cobbled together open source projects actually found something really fast that some of the attack surface mapping tools tended to miss. So I thought that was cool. Joff, Tyler, anyone else want to weigh in on your AMASS usage? Do you use it?
I haven't used it yet, but it looks extremely useful. I mean, the idea that it's just trolling different data sources and sort of taking your domains into account and giving you very, very useful recon data, that's amazing. It's fantastic. I love the idea, and I definitely see using it.
Definitely an invaluable tool from a getting engagement start, even before. We'll say before an engagement starts, as we're scoping out a potential inclement, or a client is ongoing. Like, this is all public source stuff, right? So you're getting a sense from scoping, from general maturity, from platforms you're going to have to test. So even from pre-scoping, whether or not you want to do work here or what you're going to have to do from work, it works out really well, especially if you get a lot of the integrations. And building integrations isn't that difficult either, which is another really nice piece of this.
Yeah, I haven't looked into building a custom integration. If you have your own data source and you want to build a connector to it, have you done that before, Tyler? Is that not difficult?
It's not too bad. It's not too bad. In fact, we're talking on Discord right now. One of the integrations that I haven't seen that someone brought up would be a great integration between like Bit Discovery, where you can use the Bit Discovery API and leverage that to integrate results for it. But yeah, you can definitely get integrations into a lot of different things. You can build different things with Slack bots and querying data sets against different aspects that you're looking at, or IP spaces, depending on what you're trying to query. But yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, a lot of the ASM vendors also have their own methods of aggregating stuff. So like you're aggregating the aggregators. So like any of that stuff you can pull in. Like if it were my company and I was charged protecting it, like this would just be running all the time, right? I mean, maybe I'd go out and buy a commercial one, but if you want to test the waters, like stringing this open source stuff together is a great way to get started. Also, it worked really well in my use case where maybe you just acquired a bunch of companies and you're like, well, I know what they tell me, right? But most of us could probably run it against our domains and go, oh yeah, I forgot about that. It was a great way for me to go to the IT team and be like, yeah, by the way, this is like everything I think we have. And almost 100% of the time they're like, yeah, I didn't know about that. And like, I thought that was shut down and I didn't know it was there. Right.
Yeah.
Mergers and acquisitions. This is one of the main use cases that we see for a lot of internal teams. If you're an internal team, obviously external teams, there's a ton of uses for it, but the mergers and acquisitions, getting that visibility and even just a start point for knowing what you have externally. Because I mean, there's a ton of tools out there. You got like DNS Dumpster, you've got Gray Hat Warfare, you got like a million tools that you can use. But this provides a nice platform to go and hook in a lot of the bigger data sets and not have to go and do those individually, because external recon takes a ton of time. External assessments take a ton of time and resources.
Yeah, and I also love the fact that it's got universal appeal, right? I mean, the red team side, fantastic, but also on the blue team defender side, like it's just one of those things that is like you just should do it.
Yeah.
And that's that's always the mark of a good tool when it spans the breadth of the industry. So that's really cool. And
it's free and open source, right? Which is it's just amazing. And the performance, because it's written in Go, is great. And it also tees up the next couple of technical segments, because we can talk about vulnerability management all we want, but if you don't know what you have, your vulnerability scan results are always going to be crap because they're going to be missing stuff. So like, to me, this was the first step to go have automated tools that can go dig and find all those dusty corners, find as many assets as you can. Now the next step is to take this and run it through your vulnerability scanners or your web application scanners, right? Because most of the stuff you're finding is web app related, I've found. So I actually,
especially for free, right?
For free, right? I mean, all you need is some compute time somewhere. I mean, this could be I wasn't running this from the cloud. I ran this locally, right? You just need an internet connection, and it runs. It doesn't suck up too much bandwidth or even CPU. So then the next phase is, and I did a technical segment on this last year, I want to say, Cloudflare has a open source project called FlanScan. FlanScan is a container wrapper for Nmap with the vulner script. So I actually took the results that I had from running AMASS against all of my domains, and I funneled that through FlanScan. So I basically took the domain names, ran those through FlanScan, and I'm like, I can just totally script this together and stitch that together as well. And then you'd get full vulnerability scanning. I mean, not full, but you get a pretty good sense. Like, vulners is actually pretty good, especially if you're limiting the scope to external. You're not having as many exposed services as you would potentially internally. And I was actually pretty impressed with the results and the speed at which that happened. And that's just FlanScan. Now I've got like one-liner container command that just runs it. It's awesome.
It'd be really useful. Like, one of the problems I think I see commonly, like, there's this, right? You've got your IP space, you've got your domain names. That's going to do a pretty great job, and as a good starting point. One of the things I haven't seen, and if someone wants to figure out a way to do this, is figuring out a way to query all of the services out there for corporate domain email registration, right? Like, you've got all these IT groups, DevOps groups, people registering underneath of corporate emails that may have corporate information stored. But if they don't inform you of this, how do you actually know what you have out there? That's one that's, I think, going to become a bigger issue as we move more to the SaaS and the cloud. I think we're going to see more of a demand where there's going to be a way to enumerate what assets your email address is correlated for accounting.
I think Hunter.io does that, Tyler, but I think you got to pay for that.
You do pay for part of it.
Right?
Yeah, and it depends on if the site can do username enumeration, whether or not they've got it in breach data. There's a bunch of different ways that they do that correlation.
A lot of the ASM tools will include that as well, but most of those are commercial. Some of them do have free offerings as well.
It feels like, Tyler, you're looking after cloud-based shadow IT now to really.
Well, I mean, as you move to SaaS, right? Like, that is one of the things. Like, we scour the web looking for who's mentioning something on the latest one of the latest forums. Hey, how do we do this on this particular SaaS platform? And so we go look at that SaaS platform and try and get into that data, because, most of the time IT does not know all the places that either, even accounting groups go out and use software underneath of the corporate account that IT may or may not know about.
You could parse some of that data from AMASS, because I had it do the reverse lookup on the IPs. That reverse lookup usually, like, it'll return an Amazon pointer record, basically, with the domain. And all you need is that URL, and that's your starting point to start digging into their cloud infrastructure. And even just having that list to go back to the IT team and go, here's what I found of, like, in this, I looked at all of our domains and then what IP addresses, and then I did a reverse of all those IPs, and now I have this list of, here's our Amazon infrastructure. Like, do you folks know about all this stuff? I bet you there's like, wait a minute, someone spun up something new because I don't recognize that.
Yeah, and who's managing the IAM for all of those? Are all underneath the same account? You got root.
Yep.
Like that's where the cloud and the SaaS stuff really starts to get complicated. And it's a huge footprint and risk vector from like you used to be able to have it all underneath of a single IP or at least sit behind your firewall, right? So you could figure out and enumerate it with some scans. But now with all the SaaS providers, you really don't have a full grasp on that. And even if you think you do, you don't.
Yep.
So is it fair to say that if you didn't sort of practice, proper IT hygiene in terms of inventory tracking, then you're probably screwed now?
You more so. I mean, that's spot on, Jeff. That's that is the state of affairs today.
It's totally something that you can monitor.
But it's
though,
okay
right?
because the cloud provider is PCI compliant, right?
They provide you something. They provide you cloud.
I love the aspect of sort of continuous monitoring of your DNS surface as well, right?
Yeah.
That's like you're out there just polling, and like Paul was saying earlier, he got a sense of what's out there pretty quickly that you've probably forgotten about, and that could apply to any one of the domains, plural, that I own. It's a great thing.
Yeah, and the commercial tools. I wish I had a quick and easy URL off the top of my head, but Adrian and I, we run SC Labs or SW Labs as we now call it, and we're testing these products in all these different categories. And we completed a group test of like over a dozen different attack surface monitoring tools. AMASS was one of them. So we're incorporating open source tools. So like the next one we're working on is vulnerability management. So I'm looking at OpenVAS and I'm looking at Nmap and vulners in the open source realm. But the commercial tools in attack surface monitoring do some amazing things, right? Like they all have like these slightly different features and they're all kind of amazing in their own right. And it was interesting to see the results from almost a dozen different tools I think we tested live. And see like, well, this one found this and this one found this other thing that was different. And I'm not saying everyone needs to go buy a dozen tools, but like find one that works for you in your budget and meets your requirements and operationalize that stuff, because reducing your attack surface is awesome. And also knowing about what you have out there at least gives you the opportunity to address it. And that's why I say operationalize it, right? Like take these results and try to funnel them into your processes, because it's going to speak volumes. I mean, we read in the news every day, OpenS 3 bucket here, someone got hacked here, and a lot of that's just because you got a website hanging out. Don't, if you're going to have a bug bounty program, great, but like do this first before you have a bug bounty program, because this is the first thing bug bounty hunters are going to go to. So it's good stuff.
And the SW Labs, by the way, Paul, is securityweekly.com/reviews if anybody wants to go to it.
I feel like I should have known that, right?
Yeah. You should have known that. Yeah.
There's so many URLs.
So you're young, you can keep track of them.
If only you had a way of inventorying it.
Right? If only I paid attention to all the results.
Oh my God, we've come full circle.
I got an old fart question. That was we used to worry a lot about scanning everything we have both from the inside and the outside, but this sounds like you're not so worried about that. For vulnerable.
I don't think there really isn't an inside and an outside anymore, Lee. Yeah. Right? Like with
that's
SaaS
why I said it's an old part question.
Yeah,
it's all out.
It's a hard problem though too, because you do still have like there's still that distinguishing physical hardware that you account for, but when you're talking about inside and outside, if you label those as from the security side, then there's some misnomers that end up happening. But if you don't label those, then really understanding how to secure them and how to inventory them and keep track of them becomes another problem. And then you just end up with being stuck and not doing anything. So like really, this is a problem that we've been mulling over for, I would say years, but like it's come up to the surface over the last year very, very heavily, especially with work from home and trying to come up with innovative solutions and even just recommendations for organizations that are having to deal with this right now. That's very difficult. And I think this is a problem that everybody's facing. So I think there's some solutions out there, but I haven't seen anything that's phenomenal at doing this from start to finish.
The evolution for me, Lee, is I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to run a vulnerability scanner in the traditional sense against my external facing infrastructure. And I think it was a tactic years ago that might have worked. But the thing with a vuln scanner is you have to give it a list of targets. Right, a traditional vuln scanner doesn't go out of its way to find new targets. Like, it scans what you give it. That's why I like attack surface monitoring, because it's going to great lengths, pulling from all these different sources to find as much of the stuff that belongs to you. And to me, in and of itself, it's a finding. A lot of the ASM vendors today, Intrigue, Risk IQ, I mean, there's a whole list on the reviews. We went through all of them. They'll actually find some vulnerabilities in there as well. And it's enough to, like, it doesn't have to go very deep. Like, if I've got WordPress out there, like, I want to know about it. Because if I didn't know about it, chances are it's probably vulnerable. I need to pay attention to it. Do I need to do a full vulnerability scan of every single TCP and UDP port on it? No, I just need to know that it exists. I think internally for me, I want something that has an agent. It can give me those rich results from all of the different things that I know about. And maybe you do some discovery internally. But for me, vulnerability management on the inside is all about having an agent on my assets.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, Paul, because I'm sorry, Lee. I'll let you in a minute. I've been doing some research on my own the last month or two in anticipation of version 4 coming out of PCI and what is coming new in terms of the requirements, which I'm not allowed to say what's new. But I can say it has something to do with the whole notion of internal versus external, scanning and pen testing for that matter. And I've even had this come up recently with a client that's doing basically their whole operation in the cloud. Doesn't matter which one. Pick one of the big three. And PCI requires an internal pen test, internal vulnerability scan, as well as external. External people pretty much get internet-facing, publicly routable addresses, but they were kind of scratching their heads, and we were kind of scratching their heads at, what's it mean to do internal when not so much that it's in the cloud, but so much of it is ethereal. Is that a good way to describe it? I ask our, my compadres here, is it helpful at all to think trusted versus untrusted in this context?
I would say kind of, right? Like, you have certain internal assets that are probably more vigorously deployed based on an SOP or some configuration management, and thus you control some of that with things like Active Directory and
you mean the stuff you know about because you use it, but not the stuff
There's that
Paul's talking about.
But even if you know about like your SaaS applications like Slack, right? Like, you may not have particular logging or visibility or even the capability to do vulnerability management against that platform, right? That's not authorized or is not done. So whether or not you control it, I think it's less about trusted. Well, I think it is kind of trusted versus maybe untested. You're relying on someone else.
But I can configure Slack to be really insecure, right? Isn't there a way to configure Slack where anyone can join and send messages and stuff like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, not only that, but the APIs that are exposed and how the channels are configured, whether they're private when they're set up. Like, you can do a lot of interesting things with things like Slack that companies just don't know about. So, again, the configuration control and management of those, again, we're back to the problem. This is someone else's infrastructure and application that it's still a trusted application from the standpoint of internally. From a security standpoint, yeah, you shouldn't trust any of it. So I don't know. Maybe you're right, Jeff.
I don't know if it's like a binary decision as trust and untrust. I think you should, of the applications you know about, start there and understand the roles that different users should have. Like, should it be, it's kind of like a matrix, if you will. Should it be exposed to the internet? You're like, yes or no. Okay, if it is exposed to the internet, should it be authenticated for everyone? And then if it is authenticated, what should some of those roles be? And then be able to test that. Like, Slack is a great example. Okay, do we have Slack? Yes. Okay, we're going to approve that as an application. Should just anyone be able to join our Slack server, or should there be controls running? What are those controls? And then test to that.
Well, so that's an interesting phrase you're using, Paul. So not internet reachable, not routable to the internet. The internet shouldn't see it. Is that not a way to define what we used to just call intuitively the internal or corporate network?
So I think the operating question, though, is the internal or corporate network, are we finally at the point where it's basically gone? I mean, it's I think that's what we're
it's
down
gone
to,
in the context of it's not in the basement, it's not down the hall, it's
Right.
not in the the distant building on the campus, which is where they always put IT in the first place. So it's not it's not physically present anymore. But but if that's the way you're thinking of internal in 2021, maybe we need to up our game a little bit just in terms of clarifying the terminology that we use.
I wouldn't just say internal, right? It shouldn't be trusted any more than a cloud or AWS or Azure AD. Like any of those things, I don't think are more or less secure than the internal. In fact, I would probably argue that your internal network is probably less secure and has more holes popped in it in order to enable the SaaS applications or to enable remote workforce or whatever is happening. Those distinguishing lines are still there. They just don't mean anything anymore.
Yeah. So
let me put it this way.
Comes down to, though.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Jeff. Is that for a long time, I think for years in the industry, we sort of defined these network parameters in terms of communication boundaries, but that's no longer the case. I mean, communication boundaries are actually irrelevant. The network today is treated as a transport, and so the actual security boundaries lie with user authorization today, and the control plane into these various technologies that are distributed everywhere. And so, the issues that we've all struggled with, the issues of password strength, the issues of 2FA, the issues of actually securing those attack surfaces that are more broadly distributed, is really where the issues are. Network is kind of irrelevant today.
Yeah, I was sort of going along the same lines, Jeff. What you're describing, comes from, I think, the way that we approached network or internet security in the early days, and it's based on sort of traditional defenses, which are physical. So, think of the castle with the moat, think of a fortress and layers of protection. I mean, all the stuff that we built into the early days of the internet was based on, you've got all your stuff physically in your building, and you have your own network, and now you're plugging into the internet, and that's the vast unknown, untrusted area. And so everything had to do with the perimeter protection. But my question I wanted to ask, since you're sort of leaning in the direction where I think it's appropriate that we're going, Jeff. But where today do you, as an organization, keep your most critical assets, your most critical data assets? Where's to use the old-fashioned terminology, where's the mainframe? Where's the database that's got all the crown jewel? Where do you put it, and how do you protect it?
In the cloud.
So I think what dovetails immediately into that question is any regional compliance and regulation issues, because that has and will continue to be an issue for all the cloud providers, that data has to have certain geolocality, and so we have to handle that. But ultimately, what Paul just said, sort of flippantly, is in the cloud is the answer. Right, they're really consolidated data centers is what the cloud really represents. Okay, great, and the same issues in security apply now that they've applied all along. Right, it's the CIA triad, right, which is that confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The world of encryption technology is still extremely relevant, extremely important. Because now it's distributed across the entire internet. The world of VPN technology, although related, is becoming increasingly irrelevant because the VPN world was really based on the idea that you're getting inside the moat where the castle is. And, the moat now is in all kinds of places. So I think we have distributed VPNs, but we don't have like sort of one central VPN anymore.
Yeah, I don't think it matters where the data lives. It's more how you protect it, how you protect the applications that allow access to it, how you protect the users and their identities that are access to it, and how you manage that access.
Exactly,
right?
Paul. And the focus has to be on the data, not on the heavy hardware that's in the basement.
Yeah, right.
And it's interesting what you said, Geoff, because you said all the security rules haven't changed, but the way most of those security rules are written down, PCI being a good example or a bad example, they're written in the context of the old way that we used to think about the network and the way things are structured. And the challenge right now is to take the security requirements that haven't fundamentally changed, but to be able to restate them in a contextual way that makes sense for the new technology and the new environments that we're living in.
Yeah,
and
so
I think, Paul, you're right. It's got to be data centric.
And I think in my example, like to me, when I run these attack surface monitoring tools, it doesn't matter to me where the application lives in any cloud provider or whether it's on premises. It doesn't matter if it's reachable from the internet. It gets classified in this bucket of I can reach that from the internet. If the back end, if some of it's on premises, some of it's in the cloud, like it doesn't matter. It's reachable, and that's really the finding, in my opinion.
So in
two new
PCI context,
hold on, Lee, then Geoff.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so I agree with you, but there's two nuances that people have to start getting their head around. Is that unlike the old castle model, it's not just your machine anymore. It might be shared with a whole bunch of customers. So now whatever you do, whether you're scanning it or whatever, you have collateral damage potentially as you've got others in the loop. And the other is you have to really understand how your data is protected. I mean, Jeff mentioned encryption, but it's also separations and who can control those separations. I mean, I've run in systems where the separation is simply a customer identifier in a column. And when you log in the app, you're limited to that column, but somebody with admin at the back end can see everything, which isn't necessarily okay. It's a change we're not yet fully grokking. We're getting there.
I feel like mainframe. I feel like mainframe people really got that.
They really did get that.
Right? They really did. But, and because it's very similar to cloud in that you've got all your applications and data in one massive mainframe that was running all of it. It's very similar to going to a cloud provider, and I've got all my data there, and I've got all these services that are allowing access to that data and applications using those services, and I've got to control the roles. It's very similar. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether it's on one big mainframe, Jeff, right, that's sitting in my corporate headquarters, or it's a set of cloud native applications, and everything is in the cloud, or some combination of the two. I still have to maintain security controls around apps, users, and data.
Yeah.
But so I want to
make one. Go ahead, one comment on PCI, if I would, just in that context, really quick. I think just the comment that occurred to me is both the strength and the weakness of PCI was that it was a little bit too over prescriptive tactically, and so I think what PCI is struggling with right now to reinvent itself is how to be a little bit more generalized but still be tactically useful.
I don't know. That's a double-edged sword, Job, because I kind of like that PCI was more specific than a lot of other compliance standards.
It is a double-edged sword, right? I said it. Strength and a weakness.
It's a strength and a weakness, and I agree and I disagree, Geoff, because I don't think that PCI is terribly prescriptive. It's actually what most people think of when that is said, and people say that a lot. It has to do with how often do you have to scan, how often do you have to do a pen test, and everything to do with password strength and expiration and stuff like that. Oh, it's horribly prescriptive. That's about the only detailed thing that's in it. Everything else is build your systems, harden your systems using an industry accepted standard, and it doesn't say which standard to use. It doesn't say which elements of the standard apply to you. It just says use something that's industry recognized. And I come in as a QSA and say, what are you using? And are you using it? So to me, that's not prescriptive. To me, that's wide open. You do whatever you want. Have whatever running on your system you want. Just know it's authorized, and if it's insecure, have protections around it. Don't use the insecure stuff.
Yeah, I mean, 11.3 says have a pen test. Doesn't say have a good pen test.
Yeah, but
it doesn't even really say what the pen test should be.
Right.
I'm sorry, Jeff. Go ahead.
Is it not true that PCI in its current standard still does make reference kind of to the moat model that we just spoke of? And that's a little too prescriptive.
It was written originally with sort of our traditional moat model, but it was also written from an e-commerce 3-tier architecture perspective. So you have internet-facing systems that the world communicates with, that talks to a middle layer DMZ that controls the communication in and out of your network, and then you have all your applications and databases and all the crown jewels are on the deep and the eternal. So in that sense, yes, it's very much written in that context. But guess what? I can't say what percentage. I'd say easily a simple majority, if not the vast majority of companies, especially the smaller companies that have to do PCI, but they don't really have the budget for IT, yet alone security. They're running to the cloud, and more they're going to the cloud. Sure. And we're having to figure out, how do you make these security requirements that were written in an older context, how do you translate them to you have to do this still. It still applies, but what does it look like when you're doing something in containers, when you're doing something in a virtualized environment? And what's the most tricky part about it is, real quickly, you've got a merchant. They want an e-commerce site, and so they enlist a third party to write the application, maintain the application, and that company does all its development work in the cloud, and they do the hosting of the app in the cloud. But when it comes time to checkout, you've engaged a third party, like a Stripe. I shouldn't endorse anybody. It's not an endorsement, but a payment processor that does the checkout, and that's yet another party. And so you got 3 or 4 companies that are all in this mix, and it's all hosted on a cloud provider, and all the requirements apply, but who's responsible for what? That's tricky.
Yeah. Well, I think that you made actually a very good point in that discussion, and that is we need to refocus on the data itself and not so much on the infrastructure pieces parts, right? Protecting the data is what's most important, and I'm pretty sure in your efforts for the next standard, it's going to be much more focused on the data, which is the right approach, I think.
Absolutely.
Well, and what I was going to say when Paul brought that up originally is, and by the way, the data isn't in just a database and people like checking in and check it out. It's everywhere. It's on, it's on the personal devices. It's on the tablets. It's working from home. There's something on somebody's workstation or laptop or whatever they're using. But even before the world shut down, data was everywhere. I mean, Paul and I have talked about that in the past.
That's the problem, though, right? Is the cloud doesn't solve any problems. It actually adds to the complexity. Now you have someone else's software on the same infrastructure you would have internally that you control that you now don't control, and you just have limited control over the configuration, and that configuration is where everybody messes up. So whether their hardware or underlying OS or virtualization's all PCI compliant, whatever compliant SOCs to, all of that's in order, you still have configuration to worry about, and people are still messing that up. And that's where the big issue is nothing is getting solved moving to the cloud, and everything is still a mess. It's just a
different mess,
disenfranchised mess all over the place.
Just like AWS configuration leads to 5 million records and so many more stories that we're going to cover next, including new executive orders, and there's a pipeline that was hacked. So stay tuned.
We weren't even doing the news, were we?
Stay tuned. Security news coming up next.
Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing, known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Let's see. I do have an announcement. May 27th, there'll be a webcast at 11 a.m. Eastern Time exploring the latest attacks against DNS and the latest techniques that make it possible to discover and disrupt attacks. On June 3rd, our webcast at 11 a.m., you'll learn pen testing tools, why every organization should be using them regularly, as well as some insights as to the latest features and integrations with Cobalt Strike and Core Impact. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register today /on demand to explore the entire archive of webcasts and technical training. I think that's all of our announcements. And we're ready to dig into the news this week. Did you guys hear there was some kind of pipeline attack?
The new? What's the singular of news? Isn't there just one story this
There's
week?
just new.
The new.
Nude.
Yeah.
There's just one nude.
It's the new segment.
The new segment.
It's been an exposure of a pipeline. That sounds
What
bad.
kind of pipeline are we talking about?
That sounds really bad. Where to start? It was Russia, and it's all Biden's fault. And there's a gas shortage. Okay, none of those things are really true. I mean, it was Russia, but I don't necessarily know what state.
Someone's going to clip that out and totally use that. On
it Facebook. Is totally gonna
totally yeah.
I mean, one of the interesting things about the hack is that the dark side ransomware guy, right? That's the guys that did it. They're a ransomware as a service provider. So, it's like they sell a service. It could be anybody using it to ransomware people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the problem is like when you start to talk about ransomware, especially ransomware as a service, right? Like when they start to attribute it to a particular ransomware strand and then try to provide attribution to that ransomware strand, that doesn't provide anybody any value because, again, this is ransomware as a service. It's like right in the name. Thus, you can pay to use that platform.
I don't think there was a nation state that went to DarkSide and said, I want you to go disrupt the pipeline and then give us the ransom for it. Like, none of those things really add up.
No,
the report said the computer systems that actually run the pipeline were shut down, so they didn't get ransomware. So they didn't actually ransomware the systems that were responsible for the pipeline, from what I heard as well.
If you're a nation state, like, and you have access to a pipeline, you're not going to do ransomware.
No.
First, full stop right there. That's dumb. Second, like, you
might to cover your tracks. You might to just disrupt it and make it seem like it was ransomware, and not really cash in the bug bounty.
That's high visibility. That's that's the trade of.
That's not Petya in a nutshell. What we can theorize about that, but this doesn't seem like. I mean, FireEye, Flashpoint. All companies that have really awesome researchers and have their finger on the pulse of what's happening have said, no, this really isn't doesn't really look like a nation state attack. It really looks like a group whose sole purpose was to make money. Maybe not sole purpose, but their number one goal, maybe they've got a list of goals, but number one is to make money. And it sounds like they're doing a really good job of that. Colonial paid $5 million. That's just what I read on the internet. I mean, who knows if they paid what they paid.
Bucket too. In comparison to shutting down a pipeline or gas shortage or pushing, obviously their stocks have done well in the recent shorting of that. So again, this goes back to, this seems like a target of opportunity, and I think they just recently released, there's 3 other people that have had the same thing happen, like from the same group. Like they haven't released it publicly, but there's someone in Canada, there's a European business or engineering firm, and there's one other one. So this sounds like just people that have gross security misconfigurations and left something open, and an easy way to make money off of those and low risk is ransomware, right?
DarkSide has reported, and this is from Krebs on security, they say it's been DarkSide has shown itself to be fairly ruthless with victim companies that have deep pockets, but can be reasoned with. So Intel 471 observed a negotiation with the DarkSide crew, and a $15 billion U.S. victim company was hit with a $30 million ransomware demand in January of this year. And in this incident, the victim's efforts at negotiating a lower payment ultimately reduced the ransom demand by almost 2/3. Still a pretty hefty payment.
So
That is.
I want to ask everybody that's here assembled, our fine colleagues, are any of you remotely surprised that this happened?
Well, no. And
Not in the slightest. Not in
the
the
other
slightest.
report was, and I don't know how true this is, but someone claimed to be the pen test or one of the security assessors, right, of Colonial, and basically said like security wasn't their strong suit, which doesn't surprise. To your point, John,
Right.
doesn't surprise us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you all saw the job posting for a cybersecurity manager at Colonial, which all kind of leads to it wasn't really the focus at this company. Which, I mean, but they're not alone in that. I mean, I don't necessarily
No, they're not.
fault them. I mean, we've all seen that a 1,000 times in our career, right? Companies that just like, security's not like in the culture. It's not a top priority. But then now you're in the global headlines, and now it's going to be a priority, certainly. But is it going to be a priority for other companies that aren't in the headlines? Probably not. Which is probably why we're not surprised that this happened.
I mean, a few weeks ago, I forgot who we had on the show, but the person who was focused on ICS and SCADA, we've all been there. We've done assessments in companies that have SCADA operations, have ICS operations, and we've watched and observed people using their servers as workstations and not knowing the difference and not understanding the basics of security. And so, I don't know the insides of anything that Colonial Pipeline's doing, but based on other experiential data, it doesn't surprise me. None of this surprises me.
Well, and it's just the fact that it's a gas pipeline this time, right? Like, how many companies have we had in the news that have gotten ransomware recently, or all the ones that we don't know about or aren't headlines? Like, this is just another ransomware case. It just happened to be a gas line provider. And thus, once it made that headline, now you've got a gas shortage, and now it's national news because it directly affects the end consumer in some way, which it probably really doesn't, but it does because they freaked out.
Right.
Yeah, it does if you're living next door to the guy that's storing the gas in a plastic bag.
Yep.
I mean,
in his car.
So is that how we get change to happen, is we make this directly affect the general consumer across all boards and all verticals? Like, is ransomware a bad thing at this point?
It was the impetus behind that new executive order that came out yesterday. I mean, there's a cause and effect.
Well, hold that thought, Lee. We'll get we'll
get to it.
We'll run. Let's run this to ground, and then we'll talk about the executive order. My question to the group is for and I don't know the answer to this. Is this a private company or is this
it's private
public
company.
utility? It's a private company.
Private.
So what security regulatory standard compliance regime are they beholden to?
Potentially NERC SIP.
Potentially NERC SIP.
Tyler, Joff, is that?
No,
if any of them,
part of NERC SIP.
Probably not.
Just based on what they are, no.
Is NERC SIP more just power? That's just power?
Power and nuclear.
Power and nuclear,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. It's more electrical. You're right.
So let's just on a whim think that, and I can be proven wrong, but they're probably not beholden to just about anything from a security, cybersecurity perspective, and that is part of the problem. Most companies in the private sector, unless they're told to do something, and I'm on an NSA alumni mailing list, and we've been talking about this today, and what everybody keeps bringing up is accountability, and I keep thinking, accountability in the private sector is spelled COMPLIANCE.
We talked about this on Enterprise Security Weekly, Jeff, and Adrian actually had statistics. Almost all of the critical infrastructure companies in the U.S. are like privately held. Like, it's not the government that runs power and water and gas pipelines. Like, these are all mostly privately held, or if they're not, fall under the jurisdiction of your local municipality, right? So like somewhere in Idaho, right, where they're supplying water, like maybe that water company's run by the local municipality somewhere, right? But for the most part, it's not the federal government that runs. So the federal government can't like regulate itself and do things like CMMC, because critical infrastructure is basically private companies and or municipalities that fall outside of the jurisdiction. And then we also talked about compliance in this sense. And, my whole thing is like, I like that PCI does have some teeth, right? Like there's some good, mostly negative reinforcement there of like, you should be PCI compliant, because if you're not and you have a breach, like there's consequences. Like what is the consequence for critical infrastructure? I mean, most of critical infrastructure's business model is flipped on its head. With water and power, they want you to use less of their product. Like, what kind of other company that wants to make money tells their customers to use less of their product, right? The power company and water company is like, you must conserve and not use as much of our product. And so I think that really makes, I would love to hear your thoughts, Jeff, from a compliance standpoint. Like, what could we put in place to help regulate these industries that would be provide enough of an incentive that they would do security similar to things like PCI and other standards?
Well, and this is where we might segue into the executive order that came out today, because I think you're sort of asking the right question, but to me, my take on the question, because it's always good to answer a question with another question, it makes you look smart. My take on it is not so much, how do we motivate companies to do the right thing, and how do we give them, positive reinforcement rather than negative reinforcement in terms of compliance. But there's got to be a compelling reason to do that. I mean, I always chuckle when in the former times we would go to hacker conferences, security conferences, and people love to talk about Big Brother and NSA and the government and all the infringement and EFF and the human rights. Not picking on EFF, our privacy rights and everything. But when it boils down to, we got to do something about this, we need the government to intervene with regulation. There is no other way to do it, and it's got to be. It's not good enough to just for the government to come in and regulate. It's got to. It's going to cost money, and we're very often talking about companies that are not structured in the current way that they conduct business to afford it. And so when it's a utility, I mean, we're already experiencing up and down the East Coast, I don't know if it's hit Boston or not, but the pipeline is shut down, so the gas prices are going up. If you're an economist, you understand how that works. But when there's an oil spill, gas prices go up. Why? Because these companies are passing on the cost ultimately to the consumer, and that's when it starts to be political, because people have their vested interests and they have their ideas and notions, and if somebody wants to pay for it, I don't want it to be me. It's okay if it's you, but I don't want it to be me. And that's where something like the executive order that came out today, and somebody posted it on the mailing list early today and said, hey, here it is, given everything that we know and all of our collective backgrounds and experiences, what is anybody's take on what positive, does anybody have any idea of something good that come out of this? What do you think? And I simply responded, nothing. But maybe I'm being too optimistic.
No, I think largely that's the fact that it is an executive order and not a law or a bill that has been passed, right? So therefore, it is limited as to what it can dictate, right?
But not even that. If you've read it, and I haven't read it cover to cover, but I kind of skimmed
I've
through
read
it
parts
to
of
get
it too.
the titles and everything.
Yep.
I mean, it's very comprehensive, and it's very governments. I've seen this before from the government. Here's all the right things to do. This is what needs to be done.
It's like basically like people should look into doing these things is basically kind of the gist of it, right?
Right. It's not very prescriptive.
Yeah.
Not prescriptive, and what somebody else pointed out was there's no accountability.
Right.
Somebody's got to make people do it.
It isn't the executive order, and I might be wrong because I haven't read it cover to cover. I've just read articles about it. But isn't it also kind of reactive focused? Like you must report things?
Yes.
Well, isn't it
there was a good portion of that. Yep.
You know,
notification, sharing of information. So there was a lot of rehashing of, I think somebody pulled together a lot of, what have we written about cybersecurity over the last 10 years? Let's throw it all together in this executive order because it'll make us look like we've really applied a lot of thought to it.
So it's executive order cyber soup, and okay, great. Government often is highly motivated to to get in the media and say we're doing something.
Yeah, but I mean, the sharing of information isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. However, it doesn't compel critical infrastructure companies to take action. Like, okay, maybe they find out that there are attacks going on because information sharing is more prevalent. But if you're a water company in Florida or you're a pipeline company, doesn't have a huge focus on cybersecurity, you see that report, like, okay, are you going to do anything about it? To Jeff's point, like, just nothing really makes you do anything about it, right?
No, there needs to be a stick. There needs to be a compliance stick. It
can't be fines, right? Like, we can fine Facebook, albeit you can debate how much that actually impacts Facebook, but you can fine a company like Facebook and go, you committed heinous atrocities in terms of privacy, and therefore you will pay $10 million, and Facebook's like, all right, like, where do I write the check? You know what I mean? Like, there is a consequence, but it's not. Yeah, it's not. It is. It's like a $20 bill to Facebook, right?
So there's two things I'd like to bring up for us to discuss. The first is, and this is a real concern I have, having lived in both worlds, in public sector and private sector. I, like many people, left the public sector for the more lucrative private sector, make more money, was going to get rich and retire when I was 40. That didn't happen. But, I found a passion and I found a niche, and, largely like the private sector because it is driven from a financial perspective. Stuff happens. Not all the stuff that we want to happen, but projects begin and end, and you get paid, and you move on, and it's a lot more intentional because the bottom line is it's a financial thing ultimately. In the public sector, not the case. Coming out of the DoD, it was all about national defense, and roughly speaking, the risk is the risk of human life, whether it's the military, our armed services members, diplomats, citizens abroad and at home, and so on and so forth. And in the 25 years since I've left, the DHS has come along, and now there's the CISA, and NIST has gotten more teeth than. NIST was a laughingstock from NSA's perspective 25 years ago, just saying. But and I know a lot of people that are, come from these groups, work in these groups, and they're very passionate because they have a very real mission. The mission is very real in terms of national defense in this day and age, not talking about all the hype and everything, but just the mission of, there are threat actors out there that want to do harm to us economically and politically and all sorts of things. That's very different than what motivates companies in the private sector. And there's this third wrinkle now because we talked about it a few months ago with the Florida water treatment plant, publicly traded, public utility. and now this pipeline, and maybe this is generic to industrial control systems, but there seems to be this middle ground where it's not really completely government, it's not really completely private sector, it's somewhere in the middle. So there's these two worlds that one side thinks they know what to do and want to tell, the public sector says, oh, we got all the answers, but they're typically not the most well paid and they don't have the best and the brightest, because the best and the brightest go out into the private sector and get paid more to do stuff there because the rewards are more tangible and more immediate, whatever the motivation is. So, different motivations, different sets of people. What's traditionally, in my experience, been sort of second tier is trying to call the shots and rule the shots and trying to pass that on to the private sector. And as Paul, you alluded to, you can't do that when you're the government, or it's difficult.
Not without passing a law, right?
Not without passing a law, and then you have this middle ground where it's kind of a mix. My concern is, how do you sort all that out and make sense of any of it? How do we expect a government regulation to come and solve private sector problems when the orientation is public sector, national defense type stuff? That's the point I'm trying to make. I'm not optimistic, let's say. Yeah,
I think it's going to take time. And just making appointments is a start. President Biden has made several appointments. The briefing I watched, I think someone linked to it in our internal Slack channel. I believe it was the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cybersecurity, Ann Neuberger.
Yep.
Which was a new appointment. And I mean, that's just the beginning. I mean, but these appointments really, they can't pass laws, right? Like, laws in the U.S. are passed in a completely different way, and would have to have some teeth to it, right? For critical infrastructure.
And Ann Neuberger and Chris Inglis, and the names of the other two escape me, but people that are well respected within the crowd that I'm running with,
right.
Both this mailing list and this the Wednesday night happy hour that I do.
Pulled someone. So the only one that I had was Rob Joyce. Came back to serve as NSA. He's NSA's new cybersecurity director.
Right. So all these names were mentioned today. But my issue is, they're coming from this problem without having the context. They're coming out from one side. They haven't seen the full picture.
Because you have to regulate
the other side.
Yeah, you have to regulate private industry. This isn't a federal government. This isn't NSA needs more security. FBI needs to do more for security and in international cybersecurity investigations. Like, those are federal government things that they could affect change on. We're talking about, in the context of this pipeline attack, is how do you get the private sector to be more secure, right?
I mean, isn't it ultimately, and I think we would all sort of generally agree on this, that we need some sort of standard to be published for industrial control systems across the country? I mean, because if you had a pretty broad compliance standard that was published there, that kind of like PCI, right, but only industrial control focused, that set a minimum standard, we could knock out a lot of these issues with probably not too much pain, right? Because it's not too far to go. Yeah, there'd have to be money to be spent, but
the problem is we know in security law you can't just throw money at it. I mean, the government did do that in certain capacities with the telco providers to build out the internet. There were a lot of grant programs, and the government helped a lot to build our communications infrastructure. I think it was Corey, what's his name? Sci-fi author Corey. What's his last name? It escapes. When he came on the show, you know what I'm talking about, right? When he came on the show, he talked about, we were talking about regulation. He's like, dude, like, regulation is not bad. Like, the reason we have the communications infrastructure is because the government came out and offered incentives to build out that infrastructure because there's a cost. That's something that you can throw money at and there's enough incentive. With security, as we know, like, you can't just, okay, we're going to write a check for $1 million for a certain critical infrastructure company. You need to improve security. Like, that's only a small part of it.
That's not what I was calling for, though. I mean, I think the community needs to
have some
throw
guidance.
Down another compliance standard that is kind of like PCI for industrial controls for this,
right?
For critical infrastructure, and say you have to. That's the way the regulation is. You have to adhere to this.
Or maybe if you do, there's incentives to get funding
They
for that, right?
throw an incentive out
Yeah,
there exactly to say, if you do, then hey, you get this and this and this and this. Maybe I don't know, whatever it might be, environmental, carbon credits or something.
Right. Because what we don't want is we don't want everyone who lives in the U.S. to have all of our bills go up. We don't want to pay more for gas and water and electricity. Right. No one wants that. That would probably have detrimental effects to the economy.
To be clear, though, there are regulatory bodies for gas and natural oil, right? Like these bodies fall under certain federal or state regulations. Whether that's
there has to be some regulations, right?
IEC, ISA,
like for water, like
natural gas.
There has to be someone who's looking at like the water we drink has to be of a certain level. Like there must be testing. I'm sure there is stuff like that.
Yeah, there's regulatory bodies. Yeah. Those bodies just don't fall. Like they usually fall under one of the NIST kind of frameworks, but they're not quite as mature. And even if they are, like you said, there's not a huge incentive. They will find ways to be bare minimum compliant,
right,
and still meet that without the incentive of actually doing more. Because we know bare minimum is not going to cover everything. It's going to cover ransomware. Like, let's be clear. Like some of this.
Yeah, I was going to say bare minimum might not be so bad.
You're not going to wipe anything out.
If we can get them to a minimum standard,
right?
That's a whole lot better than we are now.
I mean, PCI didn't. I mean, this is all PCI's fault. Because PCI didn't wipe out. It is. I mean, it's tongue in cheek, but I'll kind of make a case for that, right? Like PCI made it much more difficult to commit credit card fraud, and credit card fraud still happens, but just like not as often. And
it's not the most lucrative, easy money.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
It's a higher bar, and so what do attackers do? They've turned to crypto mining and they've turned to ransomware. Because committing credit card fraud is too much of a pain in the ass now. So it's all.
It was Cory Doctorow, by the way, Paul.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Said it was Cory Doctorow.
Cory Doctorow. I was blanking on the name.
Doctorow, and Adrian mentioned it in Discord. Yes. We were both trying to tell you at the same time.
Yeah, I was trying to get in there. Also, the four names I want to give proper credit: Chris Inglis, Ann Newberger, Jen Easterly, and then Rob Joyce. All people that are very well respected.
And what do you happen to know their roles? Like what their titles are? I flaked on some of that.
Not all. I'd have to Google it.
Jen Easterly is the new director of CISA. Took over for Chris Krebs.
There you go.
Yep.
Okay.
And Inglis, National Cybersecurity Director.
Okay.
And Ann Newberger, National Security Advisor for Cybersecurity.
Yep.
I don't pretend to know like what the differences are in those roles.
I have no idea either.
Yeah.
But it's the government, and so there's likely to be some sort of overlap and fiefdom building. Not saying that government's perfect or anything, but you almost touched on what I wanted to bring up as my second concern, and you didn't go there, but we could in terms of blaming PCI as an industry, as a career, as what we do. In terms of security, and we've talked at length about it. Really, is about data security, and Joff brought it up in the last segment. The whole data security triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Here's my other concern: is we've spent probably 90% of our resources over the last 25 years focused on keeping secrets, which is the confidentiality.
Protecting data, right.
We touch on integrity every once in a while, but this ransomware type of attack is really bringing the availability thing to the forefront.
Yes.
And as a whole industry, we are not architected to go after that. Now, why I mentioned that in the context of PCI. PCI could care less whether you can conduct business or not.
It's a data security standard.
Stolen.
It is the data security standard, DSS.
But it's mostly focused on the confidentiality. Don't have the data stolen.
Right.
Now, the beauty though of availability, even though we're not, and when I say architected, we don't have it in our language. We don't have it in our vocabulary to talk specifically to availability, I think, the way we should. But fortunately, all those security 101 things that you do to protect data in terms of keeping secrets probably are going to help you along with the protection against the availability things.
Sure. Yeah, because it's interesting.
So
Jeff,
it goes back to do the basics, and you're probably going to be okay.
Right. If you're protecting the data, you're also protecting yourself from that security operational risk or availability, as you coin it, right? As you phrase it, I should say.
And specifically, and I never hear anybody talking about it. Well, not to the degree I think we should. Why do these ransomware attacks work? It's very often they're exploiting known vulnerabilities where patches are available. Yes, no.
Yeah, a lot of it's email phishing too, living off the land.
It's email phishing, but the phishing launches something that exploits something, or is the phishing launching code that just executes?
It's launching for the most part.
We actually talked about this in ESW as well. Most ransomware attacks are dropping a dropper, right? And now we have an initial foothold, and then they can pick: do I want to crypto mine? Do I want to deploy some ransomware malware based on my dropper, and then go from there? And usually that's when it changes hands from criminal group to criminal group. Like, I think there's criminal groups that are solely focused on, like, I kind of thought of it as like sitting back and like if you're running Core Impact, right, and just waiting for that new agent deployed message, like, cool, I got a dropper. Right now, I'm going to go sell that, and then the person I sell it to is going to deploy the ransomware, and I'm going to take a cut of that. And if there's probably a lot more money than we think changing hands. I mean, I heard a news report that cybersecurity or crime in cybersecurity is a $1 trillion, multi-trillion-dollar industry. So, like, if you can ransomware someone for $5 or $10 million, if I'm giving you the access to that, maybe I'm taking a couple of million, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty good for me, just sitting back and running a phishing campaign. I don't know, Tyler Joff, like how much time you spend in your average phishing campaign? A couple $1 million is probably a good return on investment, right?
You're right. The resale of these these kits that are going around to be leveraged by different groups. I mean, there's a whole vertical industry there, which is something that frankly the pen testing industry doesn't really have. So it is quite a different world. But I still come back to the fact, and I think Jeff just said it, that if you take care of the data security standard side of it, what essentially PCI has done, if you actually had a equivalent standard that was required, maybe coupled with a compliance law of some sort for these industries, that would really knock down a lot of this, because we know that these things. The industry is just not aware. I mean, it's like they said, security is not their game. It just isn't.
There's one there. I'm thinking back a couple years ago in San Bruno, California. There was a huge PG&E gas pipeline explosion in a neighborhood, burned down the whole place, and it was because they weren't doing proper maintenance on the controls that regulate the pressure and bleed off of their natural gas pipelines. The regulatory body was the Public Utility Commission, and they're the ones that levied the fine not to be passed on to the customers, even though it's a privately held company. Pretty sure all of our gas bills went up in the next few years to get that fine back. My point was, I think in that case, the PUC inspection, the mandated inspection process was not looking at IT, it was looking at physical stuff, and it's ignoring the piece that's relevant to this story, is that we have got an oversight body, but if they're not looking in the right place, it doesn't matter that they are in the oversight role.
Yeah, and we don't want to pass, the consumers, us as citizens here in the U.S., don't want to foot the bill for the poor cybersecurity hygiene of our critical infrastructure.
Correct.
In your example, nor do we want to foot the bill, Lee, for, as in your example, the other, any other kind of gross negligence that may be committed by infrastructure companies. That they should foot that. Why should we foot that bill?
No. So we got to bolster what we have. The other thing I was thinking about is that nice thing about the CISA weighing in on this one. They've been really working on industry partnerships, and that's good. People need relationships to get the information they need. I don't know about threat sharing. That's going to require clearances, but I'd like to see more of that. More relationships with people that are really plugged in.
Yeah, I'd like to see. I mean, guidance and advice is one thing, but actually fixing these issues is the other thing, and that's the point I think we're all kind of saying we need to get to. Is it's great if you've got an infrastructure company, critical infrastructure, that okay, now they know about all their weaknesses, they know what to look for, but now you got to look for it and go fix it. And as we all know, that's the hard part. That's harder sometimes than doing the pen test.
That's why all these blinky box lights and companies that are selling the magic snake oil, that's why they do so well, because companies are looking to fix this. Not everybody's not doing something. There's just not a good solution unless you get back to the hard stuff, and that's doing the good fundamentals, starting from the beginning, building programs, things that take time and effort, rather than just money and blinky boxes.
Did we cover that enough for you, Jeff?
Well, I said, it either needed to be. We're not fixing the problem, and rather than rehash all the same old stuff, which we've done to some extent, I think the bottom line is a lot of organizations out there aren't equipped. They're not. It's not that they don't want to be. It's not in their budget, and nobody's making them. And I think that's the start of the problem. I've been to many companies where you talk to the people in the trenches. They know what their problems are. We've just talked about that. They know what they need to do to fix it. They know what tools they need. It was one of the fun parts about being a QSA for many years with PCI, because I would go in and say, "Hey, look, I know you know what you need. Tell me what you need. Tell me where your problems are. I'll stamp it with PCI, and guess what? You'll get what you want. Try me." And they would get it. And then we were buds. And then I would find out all the things that they were doing wrong. But, I'm good at what I do. I'm not gonna know your network and know where all your problems are in the week that I spend on site. Back in the days when I would actually go on site, you know where your problems are. Everybody knows where their problems are. The problem is more, they would tell you getting management to cough up the money, but it's an economic problem.
But it's also a continuous thing. I think it ties into my story number 4, Jeff. What you're talking about is that also you can't just go to a company, critical infrastructure or not, and go, all right, let's fix the problems. You got to build a process to do that in a continuous basis. And Acunetics, I believe, wrote this article that ad hoc scanning is not enough. It's one thing to go in and assess a point in time, even fix at a point in time. That's still just a point in time. And maybe critical infrastructure is a little more static in that sense, but it's certainly not moving in that direction. It's moving to be a more dynamic environment. It's moving more into the cloud, quite frankly, which is scary, perhaps. But it's never just a point in time thing. We've always said security is a process. And that's kind of the frightening thing for me, is that we could start to fix these issues, but if we don't enable organizations to build a process, to build a culture, to build these things in and have a constant refresh cycle, and constantly monitor and monitor when their infrastructure changes, that could be bad. And I think that's why ad hoc scanning isn't enough. You have to constantly scan your environment, because it not only does your environment change, but new threats in what you have also come out all the time. We cover it here every week. There's new vulnerabilities and exploits all the time.
Right. And the article is highlighting what to me is yet another problem in our industry is the world, our customer base, the society. When they think of security, they just want to be secure. They want to achieve that state. And for a lot of us, for many years, we ran around trying to get people to that state. Yep. And we talk it with all the con talks and all the ramblings and rants that go on. We talk about getting to that state of secure. But as you say, really the name of the game is continuous. It's security is a verb. It's something you do. It's an ongoing thing. It's not something you make the one-time investment and you set it up and you're done. The problem is everybody wants that. We know the reality is that's not how you do it.
Right.
And we're coming at it like this.
You got to make that a cost account for business and for management. They have to understand this isn't that ongoing process and that ongoing accrual and cost account that's going to continually costs them money and improvement. And as once they realize that from a business standpoint, I think they can wrap their head around it and digest it better, rather than, hey, we're trying to get to secure. It costs us $5 million. Like, here's $5 million to go get there. Why aren't we secure now? Like, they think that one-time investment, because that's how it's been pitched to them, and they only understand it that way because we've not articulated that properly. We have to be better about making this a part or a function of the business, just as accounting costs money, HR costs money, hiring people costs money. That's a net negative account income, right? You have to make sure that they understand the business language and how this process actually works, and it's an ongoing process.
I think it's also important for us not to oversell it. And what I mean by that is, we don't want to come in and propose as security professionals some sort of solution for these companies that is way, way technologically above their capability and probably too much security, right? I think what's really, really important in this sort of situation is to come in and propose a growth path that they can get on, that is achievable and sustainable for them, and to do it in a very mature and sensible way. Because if we don't do that, there's going to be that immediate denial and rejection, and that's not going to be healthy for anybody.
I think there's another piece too, and that is that they've also got to understand their risks and interdependencies. That, when they where are things going to go south if something goes down? I mean, the pipeline story, their IT systems went down, but it shut down their SCADA system because they lost control of it. Did anybody map that risk out? You move your accounting system to the cloud. Have you thought about what the availability or bandwidth to your network out is? And it's not just security. You got to look at the whole system and figure out where you have failure points, and then secure the hell out of it, and have plans for when they fail, because they will fail.
Or attackers will find a new hole in something, right? I mean, that's
absolutely.
I think that segues
like
nicely.
Wi-Fi?
Like Wi-Fi, like frag attacks, which is interesting because this is like a new old attack. So a couple of sources, Larry was one. What we're talking about is basically there was a list of advisories, right? But one in particular is the ability to inject I'm reading from the article, an unencrypted Wi-Fi frame by carefully constructing a frame. This can, for instance, be abused to intercept client traffic by tricking the client into using a malicious DNS server, which I thought was an interesting way to execute this attack. And so I believe Josh Wright talked about this 10 years ago, is what Larry said. Cedric Blanchard, who passed away in a skydiving accident, I believe. Is that the one?
No.
I think, was he the one that was involved with Backtrack as well? There was one of the early, I think it was Cedric. He passed away, I believe, in a skydiving accident. He was the author of Wi-Fi Tap, and someone also said that Wi-Fi Tap had this ability in that tool to basically exploit this vulnerability, which is now coming to life and has a website and a logo and a song and a dance and all that stuff. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying this isn't necessarily new. These are things we kind of knew about Wi-Fi that maybe weren't as publicized as they needed to be. And that's my extent of it. I was going to rely on Larry to provide more color. If anyone else has more they would like to add, I am all ears.
So, they claim that some of these are flaws in the basic protocols themselves, and others are flaws in the way they're implemented. But in order to exploit them, you've got to basically be on top of the device. You can't. This is not something you're going to do from across the street even with your Pringles can. So it's not a stop the world, but I think we'll have to see revisions in the standards to get rid of some of these. And I'm not sure after 10 years of them being there, they're going to be a change like that. I mean, that's too foundational a change. But secure implementations, those should be resolved. I mean, those guys should come out with patches, but they'll probably come out with a buy our new model. It's not vulnerable instead pitch.
And I think a lot of the mitigating factors, like you said, based on how this is working, you have to be very close to the device. And a lot of the good systems have things like AirWatch or brute force or deauth protection via like air marshalling or one of the other ones. So there are ways to provide some level of protection against some of this. So there's a very there's some limited use cases to how you have to do this, but I see this actually expanding.
You've got to be at the 802.11 layer.
Yep.
Because like Lee said, they're not going to fix it in the protocol, so you have to have something that operates at the 802.11 frame layer to be able to, much like ARP, right? Like, because you're not going to fix ARP, but you can have external tools and systems and processes that help prevent attacks, but those are external. And I think, Tyler, what you're talking about is basically the same thing for 802.11.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's going to be the saving grace, and that's also going to make this probably a bigger issue later on down the road when people figure out how to do this differently. And relying on these mitigating technologies.
So just a note, Cedric Blanchard was the author of Wi-Fi Tap, and he did pass away at 37 in a skydiving accident in France. We interviewed him on the show. I didn't know that. He was an awesome security researcher, did a lot with wireless, wrote some of the web cracking tools, was involved with Backtrack back when it was Backtrack before it became Kali. So yeah, he was awesome.
I mean, we could almost do a segment on this one. It could be really interesting if we could get some demos going.
Yeah, I'm sure Larry's working on it. Maybe not as we speak.
We know him so well.
Yes, but he's definitely working on it. What else we got in here? Those were the big stories. Oh, Apple. So apparently, and I don't remember this attack, to be honest with you, but there was a supply chain attack against Xcode. So basically someone stood up an Xcode kind of download site, in the version of Xcode, the development framework that you would use to develop iOS applications and Mac OS apps had backdoors in it.
Right.
And there was a court case against Epic Games. Epic Games and Apple have been going at it for a while, and I don't pretend to know some of the details there. They escape me at the moment. But in emails presented during Epic Games versus Apple court proceedings revealed new details about this attack. It turns out nearly 128 million iOS users downloaded the apps containing the Xcode Ghost malware, which was put in there via the supply chain attack against Xcode. Apple kept this malware attack secret and did not share the impact's full details. Also in the article, it says did not notify those 128 million users, and they have emails basically showing that Apple employees were like, yeah, that's a lot of users to email, like we can't do that.
What the hell?
No surprises there.
I mean, I remember they did the Xcode updates because of stuff like this, but I didn't realize it gotten apps deployed to 128 million devices.
That's a lot to just sweep under. Like, there's a big rug at Apple that they take a lot of the security vulnerabilities and they just sweep it under.
Well, you need a big rug.
A big rug is in the shape of an Apple and Apple headquarters, and that's the one, like, it's hollow underneath, and just sweeping that security vulnerability stuff right under there. Nothing to see here.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of devices, especially considering, although they push pretty heavily to get people to the new platform, whatever that is. So I can see kind of this with inside of their framework of design. Even the iPhone X, there are certain security updates you're not going to get for that, and thus you should probably move to the next one.
Right.
And I don't know if it was the X in particular, but there's a ton of precedents. That's just the Apple way of doing it. Move to the new thing to be secure.
Yep. And no ports on anything. I think the next Apple device is going to be nothing to plug into. No ports. It's my prediction.
That's probably not far off, honestly.
Right? I mean, you think about it. If you've got wireless charging, and Apple's done this before, they've made changes, which is weird. And Apple really doesn't capitalize on the kind of accessories thing. They kind of leave that to other companies, which I always found a little weird. But they definitely could make a new iPhone and have no ports, because, I mean, there's no headphone port on it. Your only port left is your charging port. And if you've got a wireless charger, why do you need a port? Maybe you interface with it to change your phone wirelessly, like you would when you get a new phone. And maybe they build ways into their in Mac OS where wirelessly you can connect to the phone if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
And then why do you need ports in your Mac device?
Yeah, you do.
That's going to open a whole new can of worms, I think.
Maybe you get one Thunderbolt port. That's it. I'm thinking it's one.
I don't even see that, right?
Could be none.
for what like again, they're going to push you to whatever the latest thing is, which is going to be, I mean, you have Bluetooth, you've got AirDrop, you've got your AirPods or whatever, Bluetooth technology they're going to use in near field. Like there's really not a great use case for wires once they kind of get through some of the hinges of getting consumers to buy into that.
Right.
I mean, you get all the magnetic stuff now too. So
I think they've been grooming it. It's coming.
Yeah. Well, it still amazes me that the smartphone and tablet manufacturers with the ports have still got a device you can drop in the water and it's going to be okay. I mean,
Right.
That just blows my mind. Imagine if you don't have the ports.
Yeah, then you can take it diving with you. It's going to be awesome.
Hot damn. Let's go diving.
Because every time I go diving, I'm like 20 feet down. I'm like, shit, I need to text somebody.
I need
to tweet.
I need to make a tweet. Here's another atrocity. So the biggest ISPs paid 8.5 million fake FCC comments opposing net neutrality. I hadn't kept up with the latest in the net neutrality battle, but there was the repeal in December 2017, which had me up in arms. I just like the internet should be a free and open place. If you're a content creator, much like we are, you want net neutrality, right? But in this particular case, all of the fake comments. So every industry-funded research found that 98.5% of genuine comments opposed Ajit Pai, who was the director of the FCC. Right, I think Biden appointed someone else, I believe, opposed the deregulatory plan. But today's report reveals the details about how many comments were fake and how the broadband industry was involved. It's like basically the people that would benefit from repealing net neutrality paid people to make fake comments to say, yeah, like, let the internet be run by the broadband companies, essentially.
Nice.
That's crazy.
I like this bit about they hired someone else to do it, so they had no direct knowledge, so they had deniability. I mean, come on. You still spent $4 million.
Which is really not all that much. You look at how much election campaigns spend in disinformation. Like, that's a pretty small drop in the bucket for ISPs, and it doesn't surprise me in the slightest because
I mean, the money they would they would stand to make if they could basically have control over the content that flows over your internet connection.
It's still
by control, I mean priority, right? Like,
yeah,
if it's AT&T, their services get great bandwidth, so you have to subscribe to their services. Like, what is they own a satellite company. What is it? The satellite TV company? Dish? Is it Dish?
Dish, Comcast. I don't know. One of them.
One of them, right? And basically, what that means is, if you consume your content over services that AT&T owns, but you want to use Netflix bandwidth is shitty, but AT&T services are awesome. And if you want Netflix to be faster, you can pay us an extra $20 a month, and you can get Netflix and Hulu and.
It's just That's a dirty, slippery slope.
Dirty. It's awful.
So bad.
It's awful. It's bad.
I didn't even know it was still a thing going on. Honestly, I
didn't either. But apparently, they shined a light on themselves, which makes them look kind of shady, which I think is a good thing for us, right? To show that there are not good intentions happening here.
Hey, speaking of net neutrality, did you blow up the wiki?
I did not do it on purpose, but yes, I have made people aware that it is down. Yes.
Will it come back? Or
it will come back.
Okay.
I can't tell you when, but there are people working on it while we're doing the show.
All right.
Yeah.
Inquiring minds on the Discord want to know.
Yes.
Thank you.
That was not on the Drobo. That's okay.
It was not on the Drobo. No. So this is another interesting debate, the segue from net neutrality. So police caught one of the web's most dangerous pedophiles. If you read the details of this case, I mean, it makes you sick to your stomach to read it. Just the number of accounts in there is just staggering. Apparently this believe was investigation primarily in the UK. But basically what they were saying is they caught someone who was just one of the most heinous pedophiles and had multiple phones, multiple social media accounts, not something like 90 people, many of them obviously children, just awful. But the way they were able to get the evidence against this person to actually arrest them was being able to monitor Facebook messages. As many of us know, Facebook wants to make those messages more and more encrypted across Instagram and Facebook. And it kind of sparked the crypto wars argument of the 90s. And law enforcement's like, if this data was encrypted, we don't know that we'd be able to prosecute this person. And so it brings up that thing. If once these things are encrypted, it makes it harder for law enforcement to be able to collect evidence that allows them to prosecute cases such as pedophiles. On the flip side, there also is privacy that is at stake for people who are not criminals. And, this is how we ended up with things like the Clipper chip. Jeff.
I
suggested.
The good old Clipper chip. Wait a minute. There's also the Forteza card.
What was the Forteza card?
Yeah, what is that?
Similar to the Clipper chip. Only spookier.
So I guess law enforcement making a case going, don't encrypt this stuff because we're going to have a tough time.
Well, I what was the name of the? It doesn't matter. I heard someone speak a couple years ago on this topic in the context of in the previous administration, and what they were saying was essentially, we have all sorts of rights, we have constitutional rights, but there's even our constitutional rights are limited, and the search and seizure portion of the Bill of Rights, assumes that if there's a suspicion of a crime, the government's going to come in and search for the evidence. So the whole idea of warrants and search and seizure, that type of thing. And this person was suggesting that's got to extend into the electronic realm as well. So he was a proponent for more the Clipper chip type of thing, which was the back door, the master key that would decrypt all the messaging, which is essentially what the Clipper chip was trying to promote. Mm-hmm. The keys would either that. I'm sorry, that might have been the Forteza card. One was a master key, one was key escrow, so that there would be an independent third party that would be a gatekeeper or key holder that the government could come and say, hey, we suspect that there's a crime being committed. Would you please check out the keys so we can read this person's information and data, that type of thing. I'm certainly not a lawyer or not a constitutional lawyer, but the argument made sense to me in the context of, while we like to think we have absolute freedoms and rights to privacy, because we agree to live under the rules of a country, we happen to live in a better country than most, but we're still subject to, within certain boundaries, having our rights infringed upon, from our perspective, because there's a greater purpose, national security interests or whatever. And usually the trump card is when it comes to pedophilia and crimes against children, whether it's pedophilia or trafficking, human trafficking. Mm-hmm. That's what makes everybody stop and go, yeah, what should we do about that?
That's a hard call, though, because, again, we see how this always goes wrong. People cannot secure the master keys. Like, we know that. There's not an unhackable system out there. Yes, there's some government has some areas that do better than others, but that leads to abuse, that leads to leakage, that can lead to other people getting in and abusing that or stealing it. So there's just no good, in my opinion, I don't see any good reason, even with the case of human trafficking and pedophilia. Like, I hate that stuff, but there's got to be other ways to do this differently. Like hire some damn hackers that are really good and, go after these people rather than just here's a key and like everybody's at risk. Put those people at risk and start targeting them with the pointy end of a spear.
You signing up, Tyler?
I've been trying to find someone that has a pointy spear for me to sign up with for a long time. Problem is all these places have really great people, good intentions, and great programs, but that pointy end of the spear is overwhelmed, and therefore it is not a very pointy spear, and it does not react very quickly. But that's an awkward silence, so I'm open if anybody knows of any pointy spear.
It's a tough problem.
Yeah, and it's like, whose responsibility is it? Is it the providers? Is it the government? Is it law enforcement? Or some combination? There are all laws that say you're not responsible for what people say on your platform, right? Forget the actual statute that has been tested.
208 or 203, that one? Something
like that, right? And like, whose job is it to, air quotes, police, the content that's on there? At what point do you would encrypt it? There are Photo DNA is a service that's used to detect child pornography and is used by a lot of providers to do that. But the child pornography stuff is on the rise. It's sickening. You talk to any of your friends in law enforcement like I do, and they're like, "This is so many cases all the time." A lot of that's because the internet is a vast space now that they can do that. And this stems back from the days of BBSs. That stuff was going on, and now they've got a much wider platform to do that with. And how do you control that content? How do you discover it, and when it's that large?
So one of the interesting things that was in the article was how WhatsApp, is using metadata and trends that, because the pedophile and other types have a very different behavior than the normal activity on their app, so they stand out, and they're able to run it down without having to worry about breaking the encryption because the behavior just doesn't fit model, and that's where
I would like to call out in the paragraph before WhatsApp is cited. They mention end-to-end encryption, and they cite Phil Zimmerman in Pretty Good Privacy. Technically not an end-to-end encryption solution. It would encrypt the payload and then you sent it.
Right.
Which is
very
different.
true. Very true. Yeah, it's payload encryption.
Right.
Yep.
Nitpick, but sorry. It's my crypto moment for the evening.
Yeah, I don't favor models that break encryption or provide backdoors. I just was highlighting that WhatsApp is trying to use analytics based on data they could see to identify problems.
Are they using AI and ML?
Yeah, it sounds like they're using natural language processing as well, because they do also mention in the article that certain languages, such as Hindi, don't respond well to their algorithms.
Oops.
It reminds me of many things that I used to do or was exposed to at that 3-letter agency where I used to work, where you
listen to everyone's phone calls.
Even no, we did not. Mostly it was radio traffic back in those days, right. and even back then, actually breaking the ciphers, breaking the codes, and reading the underlying messages, was not a terribly common thing for the bigger, more mature nation states. Use your imagination. But there was a whole lot that you could learn from other things,
right?
That were somewhat depicted here without going into a lot of details. I'll give you one example. I might have told this story before on the air, but back when I was there, we had this little skirmish in the desert that was called Desert Shield, and then later Desert Storm, the first Gulf War. So Desert Shield was when Iraq invaded. Gosh, what was it? Kuwait.
Was it? I was going to say Kuwait would have been my guess.
I think it was Kuwait, and so the U.S. amassed troops and sent all sorts of naval ships, and we're hovering, waiting. So Desert Shield was the building up of the troops and deploying them and getting them in place. Desert Storm was when the actual military operations started, and everybody was trying to predict, from a media journalistic perspective, when's Bush? This was Bush Senior. When's he going to pull the trigger? When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Some astute reporter in the D.C. area noticed one evening that the lights were on at the Pentagon and a whole bunch of pizza delivery trucks were showing up, and he said, "Ooh, I bet you this is the night." That's stuff that we call traffic analysis or operational security. He saw something different in terms of the behavior, and he accurately predicted shots are going to be fired pretty soon. So there is a lot of other things you can do. So I guess if I'm going to take a stand, I would tend to agree that I don't want to put backdoors in crypto systems or escrow the keys for all the reasons cited. I am of that camp, and there's a lot of other things you can do to get the end results. It makes you work at it, but there are other ways. They just might be a little bit more time consuming and more expensive. This would be an easy route, but easy translates to insecurity and abuse and all sorts of bad things happening. So that's my take on it.
Speaking of bad things happening, Code Red 2.
Oh, so apparently there's a wormable vulnerability in IIS HTTP servers.
HTTP protocol on Windows.
Right? I was like, this is Code Red 2.0. Could be.
Yeah.
Very exciting and very scary with ransomware right now.
Yes.
No, I think there was like 55 security holes patched this last go around, which is one of the biggest patches that's happened in recent histories. I think it was 2019, 2020, since we had something kind of this big. There was 4 or 5 different RCEs with inside of that, and the wormable one is kind of the most notable. There's some serious they said it's not a high bar to kind of exploit this. It's at the kernel level, so pretty big deal.
Specially crafted packet to a server utilizing the HTTP protocol stack to process packets and ultimately leads to execute arbitrary code and take over the affected system.
See, and the thing people don't think about here is they think IIS, okay, I don't have IIS stood up. But you start to think about some of the Microsoft products you install, like Visual Studio or any of those others.
Oh, that's interesting.
Many of these build and stand up IIS natively.
Yep.
Yeah, this is unauthenticated too. So
it's been a long time since we've seen a really widespread, remotely network exploitable entity like that. That this is going to get interesting, I think.
This is a bad time. I mean, as ransomware is so rampant, it seems like it just keeps ramping up and up and up. This is a bad time to have that kind of bug.
Yeah, so go patch, because there's 55 patches to apply, and then that's not even only RCE. You got IE11 vulnerabilities in there.
People still use IE?
I was trying to remember.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, it still comes natively with Windows 10. So
no, I thought Edge has been coming with my latest Windows.
It does if you haven't been doing the upgrade path all along. If you do a fresh install, then yeah.
Oh, right. You still have IE because it's there. They don't remove it when you're upgrading.
Negative.
I've done fresh installs, and I get which, quite frankly, I like Edge as a browser. I'll admit it. I think Edge is really good.
I think Chromium Edge is great. The original Edge was awful.
Yes, I agree. It reached a maturation kind of point for me, and then I started running it on Linux, and I tell you what, it runs pretty damn good on Linux, like better and better. Even in the last 3 months. They've done some serious, every time I patch one of my systems, and I try and be diligent about patching them at least weekly across my 3 Linux systems that I use most regularly. And almost every week they've had an update, at least for the past almost month and a half. And Edge is it's awesome. And anytime I need to dump into an Office 365 app, I use Edge to do that. And
Yeah, it's gonna work.
it works. It's pretty awesome.
I mean, as soon as Microsoft got out of the browser game and utilized other code for the back end, they got rid of like 80% of their attack surface.
Now, we've seen a lot of 0 days in Chrome.
Right.
You wonder if Microsoft's doing a better job of maintaining that code in more secure basis, right? And particularly those stem from the V8, the JavaScript engine within Chrome. You wonder if Microsoft's doing a better job of that.
So it's kind of interesting, right? Because Microsoft's entire culture has changed with respect
to security, right?
Security and also opening up, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys caught this little Python comment right now, but in November of 2020, Guido van Rossum, the Python author,
does he work for Drop? Does he? Where is he? Is it? It's not Dropbox, is it? Where does he work?
No, he's working at Microsoft.
He is. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting there because we're going to potentially see impacts with regard to Python integration into Windows as well, which is kind of fascinating.
That's interesting to see how it would compare with PowerShell. Yeah.
Now I don't know where it's going to go, but I'll find the tweet. It was great. I literally was writing courseware, and I was right at the section where I was talking about Python and shellcode injection. And I found this tweet, and it was just like golden. I was like, drop right into the courseware.
Jeff, I read an article, I believe it was last week, that was advocating for not using Python lists for performance. So they pointed out in Python lists that you take a performance hit for that, and you can mix types in a Python list. They were advocating to use the built-in library for Python arrays, saying that it was better performance and safer to use because you're limited to a type in an array. I wanted to get your thoughts on that, being the Python expert.
Yeah, so I think that's a mixed bag, right? Because one of the things that attracts people, put security aside just for a second.
Sure.
One of the things that really attracts people to Python is that intuitiveness aspect, and the fact that you can mix object types in a Python list is extremely powerful from a programming perspective and extremely intuitive for a lot of people. So I get that, but by the same token, as Python is shifted from Python 2 to Python 3, there's actually been an increasing move to, or I probably should say decreasing, but to do away with the use of Python lists as a return object type for various built-in functions.
Yep.
If you look at the range function, if you look at the map function, if you look at various the dictionary keys function, the dictionary iterator.
Yeah, it's been more dictionary focused than list focused. Yeah.
Right. They all much less list focused, and one of the reasons for that was that there was not only there was a slight performance impact, but the bigger issue was a memory consumption impact, because a lot of these various built-in functions, as well as the various modules, were returning list types and having to allocate a lot more memory, either on the stack or on the heap, based depending on the context, as your script was executing. And so it became much more popular to use iterators, which
definitely
gave you a better performance and didn't consume as much memory.
But security-wise, though, if you're writing code, if you're going to a traditional array, which Python does implement, which actually I've never used, I don't think, in Python.
I've never used an array in Python.
Right? Yeah. But if you're doing arrays and you have different types, now you're talking about multi-dimensional arrays, and that complicates your code and potentially opens up security vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it potentially does, right? Here's the other aspect of this that I hadn't gotten to is that Python has never been a strongly typed language, right? It's always been fairly
moving in that direction, though.
Yeah, it is. There are areas where it's saying, well, we have, for example, now with functions, you can declare them as a sort of a type suggestion, if you like, and you can declare return values as a type suggestion. Doesn't necessarily enforce it, but it is tending to move that way. But I'm not sure that it'll ever get there fully, because I think that sort of moves against the original design intent of the language.
To make it easier to use and code and faster.
Yeah, exactly. The original Zen of Python was, intuitive, easy, simple, that's been the very gestalt of it, and I don't think that's going to change. I think Guido and the team have still really kept that at the heart of things. And you've also got to remember, historically, Python came out when Guido van Rossum and the people around him were looking at Perl and basically being disgusted by the state of what was in front of them.
Right.
And I can't blame him. I mean,
yeah, well, because it was rare. And my kind of gauge for this, Joff, is with Perl. It was rare to have a Perl project go over 10,000 lines of code, and I think Python is so awesome and beautiful that people did end up with Python projects that were over 10,000 lines of code. And then very quickly you realize that some of those nice things that we do with types in Python are not positive. Now they're a negative once you get over 10,000 lines and multiple developers.
What actually happened was versioning quickly became a significant issue because language features and module changes became a real big, and this is why I always like to say, like, Docker and Python go together, like, like perfect fit, because you can fix your Python version in time with a Docker container, and
I've done that. I did that with our internal app with PPWorks. I used Docker to take us to 3 and create that environment, and it wasn't as bad. I freaked out. I was freaking out that we had to do it, but after I did it, I was like, actually, that wasn't that bad. And our project is over 10,000 lines of code, and I was like, it wasn't that bad, actually.
It's like any tool, right? Python has its place. It is a fantastic proof of concept tool. It is a fantastic high-level, get-it-done-quickly kind of tool.
Yep.
But, there are times when you need to go deeper, when you need a compiled language, when you need more robust typing, and Python's not necessarily a tool for you when you get to that point.
And while we're on the subject, and security-related too, what is your kind of gauge on the conversion from Python 2 to Python 3? Have a lot of projects moved, and what's the security risks as it stands today between Python 2 and 3? If you're still running 2, you're not getting updates anymore, right?
Yeah, I think you're in a riskier situation if you're still running 2. They will do maintenance releases of 2 if there's a horrendous security issue.
Yep.
Detected, but they're not.
Yeah, and like so libraries, IP address and netmask both had vulnerabilities in the Python libraries. And so did they fix those in 2 as well?
I don't know whether they backported and fixed those in 2. I don't know. But look, I mean, it comes down to anything in security, right? If you're going to use legacy code, then you're going to be exposed to the issues of not patching legacy code. I mean, that's just going to be a fact, and you're going to be better off in 3. I mean, 3's has got the advantage of having some type safety introduced. Has got the advantage of tightening up a lot of the memory usage and a lot of the initial vulnerabilities. I mean, some of the early vulnerabilities in 2 was essentially related to evaluation of Python statements in certain input scenarios, right? And that's been removed in 3. The raw input versus the input function, those sorts of things. I think it comes down to the same old things that we've seen in any software ecosystem. I hate to use that word, but say like Microsoft operating systems, for example. I mean, you want to be stuck in the past, then hey, do that, but you are going to basically have an increasing risk over time.
Yeah. You did a webcast on converting from Python 2 to 3.
I did. It's been a while.
I used that as a reference. I watched that. That was helpful. Thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah. Yep. And there's built-in tools, right?
Yes.
2 to 3. It's actually a tool called 2 to 3, which does a half reasonable job. It doesn't completely do the job, because one of the biggest things that people trip over is the fact that Python 3 represents strings as UTF-8.
Yes.
And Python 2 still uses.
See, but that actually, in my app, and I'm sure a lot of other people too, that actually helped me. I think that's also a great security thing as well, because I think you can run into some trouble there security-wise as well. But that actually helped the usability of my application. And I didn't use the 2 to 3, but another tip there is to use your IDE. PyCharm, likely VS Code, all have linting tools that will like tell you. And I think that's why it wasn't as bad for me, because I had the linting tools. That was like when I was coding or looking at a particular function or method or class in my code, I was like, it would tell me like, this code is only going to work in Python 2. It's not going to work in 3, and like put a squiggly red line like underneath it for me. And like we would kind of fix as we go as developers. I think that's a good approach.
Good. That's good. And those IDEs are definitely helpful. I'm pretty big fan of Visual Studio Code, although some stability issues there occasionally on various operating systems. But
check out PyCharm. If you haven't looked at PyCharm, it's awesome. JetBrains makes awesome
I have
tools.
looked at PyCharm, and I may actually go back there. It depends on. So I'm authoring in Golang, C#, and Python these days, so I tend to vacillate between all three.
They have a Golang IDE too as well.
Yeah. I find Visual Studio Code there pretty good for Golang. While we're on development,
just another story or two. Jenkins Attack Framework was released, which is interesting because we use Jenkins in our build pipeline today, and that's another like legacy thing. Like Jenkins was all the rage, and then there was a lot of other CI/CD tools out there. But what I thought was neat in this release is that this new framework, it automates and simplifies many common Jenkins attack and introduces some new techniques, which are not like they say it's not 0 days, but there's some attack techniques in here that are not well known in the offensive security community. So if you're on a pen test and you run across Jenkins, or you're using Jenkins in your environment, this is a pretty cool framework. It's called JAF, Jenkins Attack Framework. It came from the folks at Accenture, and is a pretty cool little framework for assessing the security of your Jenkins environment, which I can tell you from firsthand experience, if you've got Jenkins stood up and it's working, and if you're in a DevOps model of any kind of regular release cycle, you don't want to mess with your Jenkins environment because it's automating all of your builds for all your software, and you don't necessarily want to update it. And updating it is not for the faint of heart either. It's a cool framework to look at.
Nice.
And I mean, you get into Jenkins, man, that's a treasure trove for you pen testers out there. You can find some juicy stuff inside of Jenkins. And it would really allow you to control all the code repositories, all that stuff. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. Lee, did you have any stories you wanted to finish out the show with?
I was just looking at that because we covered so much of these. Well, I got a really mundane one, but there's a update your Acrobat readers and stuff, because there's a use after free vulnerability in there.
It's like we're never done finding vulnerabilities in Adobe Reader.
Yeah, I mean, I thought once Flash was gone, the rate would slow down, didn't you?
No, because Flash
Adobe
was a hot
is
mess.
the gift that keeps on giving.
So just to speak to Flash, I mean, it's not only, I mean, it died a pretty fast death, but it's further being just like killed, right? Like, I don't remember what the article was I read, but like it's gone. Like, no, I think, was it Microsoft that was going to remove it? Someone was going to fully remove it because the browsers largely have removed it. It's not in any, it never really has been like default in any Linux distribution. Apple has never really been big on Flash. I mean, they really never supported Flash. So I mean, like it's deader than dead at this point. But I'm sure there's some people out there that are still trying to run it. We covered some stories about people backporting browsers to still run it, which is kind of frightening.
So there's still Microsoft's dirty little secret called Silverlight, which is essentially Microsoft's version of Flash.
Is that still a thing?
It's still out there. It's not quite dead yet. November.
Mostly dead.
Mostly dead.
Yeah. It got better.
But Reader's still alive and still finding a lot of vulnerabilities in there.
Yeah. It's crazy. Actually, no, the nice thing is now with there are more and more ways it will keep itself updated, so you don't have to work as hard anymore. But it got a little less aggressive. It used to just go out and update itself in the middle of whatever. Now, if you're doing something, it'll wait till you shut it down before it'll do it. But it's much better than it was, and that's a big help. But still, I wish I don't want to go to an alternative PDF store, but sometimes it's really tempting.
Mm. I mean, you wonder, like, if the OS providers have a tool that's built in that does it, like, do you really need Adobe Reader? The problem is that some of the OS tools kind of suck at rendering PDFs.
Well, you got things like signing PDFs and fillable PDFs and additional, like, being able to do typewriting with inside of a PDF. Like, none of those come with just the reader, which is a lot of PDF usability is kind of doing. Which, why is that general functionality not built into the OS? Maybe because they see what a shit show Adobe PDF has been. Maybe
it can't be easy to code that securely, right? I mean, because you're trying to render data, and right. I mean, look, we see that in the JavaScript engine, we see that in the browsers, we see that anything that's rendering data. I go back to Snort, right? I mean, has to process all of this unstructured data. You don't know what you're going to get, and parsing all of that. I remember Marty saying that, like, that's the biggest pain in the ass with Snort is all of those processors of data. We see that in serialization vulnerabilities in Java. It just, taking in that unknown kind of data always leads to vulnerabilities, and I think Adobe has suffered from that in Reader, and they likely had some really crappy legacy code that they're still uncovering vulnerabilities in.
Yeah. Every now and then I think about when we first started playing with PDFs 20 plus years ago, and for some reason we thought they were read-only.
Yeah.
And boy, was that wrong. They actually do have one that is. It's called PDFA, PDF Archive. It's supposed to live till the end of the Republic, which could happen any 4 years, but okay. But that really is, you can't alter them. They are, but the rest of them can be altered. Anyway, unless you want to wrap it up, the other thing I was thinking about was the advisory from ACSC on the add-on ransomware.
Well, let's talk a little more about ransomware. You had a lot of ransomware stories in there.
Yeah. Well, this one was interesting because they were I can't say it. Sorry, the Australian ACSC. Help me, Joff.
Which story is this? Yeah, Joff speaks Australian.
It's my tongue is broken. It's
are you talking about the Australian cybersecurity? Blah blah blah.
Yeah,
ACSC.
They are awesome. They are.
Oh,
really
no, they do great work. They do great work.
And so whenever I see a story with ACSC in it, I look twice because they're like, they don't cry wolf. They got their act together.
Yeah. There it is. Australian Cybersecurity Center. Yeah. No, they're doing really, really good work, and they're hiring too. Maybe it's time to leave the country. Bye, everybody.
And but this particular ransomware is targeting. They've mapped out the countries and the sectors it's targeting. And so if you fall into one of these groups, and there's quite a bit of groups, but you could take this information and really make sure you got your shit together. And of course, this particular ransomware is one of those double extortion. They not only encrypt, but they also steal your data and then ransom it back to you.
Their logo and marketing people are doing a pretty good job. Just saying, from in comparison to most of the ransomware, they've got a cool logo.
They do have a cool logo.
Well, you know what it is in cybersecurity these days. If it's not got a sexy logo, it's not real.
So this reminded me of something I ran across a couple days ago, that the cyber insurance companies are backing off on paying for ransomware. Remember, you could engage cyber insurance and then they would take care of negotiating and paying it. And there was a report in the first half that came out last September. In the first half of 2020, ransomware reported for insurance claims was up 260%.
It's the first year that insurance companies have actually lost money on cyber insurance.
So shockingly, they don't want to insure against ransomware anymore. Tyler, can you explain that one to me?
So there's a big push right now to begin making a minimum bar of acceptable risk when they take on a new policy, and it's hard for them to take on a policy and be able to judge the maturity and risk of an organization. And so when they do that, they're trying to figure out a way to, one, gauge what the risk is to them, and two, have a minimum bar of expectations of security in order to engage in backing them with cyber liability insurance. And that will go down for, what they're able to cover and what they will cover. And I think that's a move in the right direction, because insurance companies do have a lot of latitude in order to make companies do things, because without the insurance, many of the procurement and negotiation and contracting can't go through. They can't do business. And so the insurance companies and they know, well, some of the good ones know this level of responsibility. They know they have the ability to affect change. And so there's some big initiatives in some of the bigger insurance companies to start making those changes. And I think this is a move in the right direction, because they're not just blanket covering and allowing people to be negligent. They're starting to have to push the bar and force people into doing a better job.
Do you think the customers got the message?
I think they will start to when they start to see they can't get insurance, and if they can, it is at a much higher premium if they're not doing better things.
Well, that follows.
I think they're going to find that cybersecurity is not the answer, and I think we've established on this segment certainly that it's reaching that kind of PCI level when it comes to ransomware. That we got PCI because credit card fraud was so rampant. Now we've got ransomware that's so rampant. And unfortunately, the answer is not as simple as it is with, not that PCI is simple, right? But it's not a simple answer to protect against ransomware. I mean, it means you got to have a really good cybersecurity program. And as we all know, that's not an easy thing. It involves process, procedures, technology, collaboration, constant monitoring, and all those things, which is hard. I mean, we already established that cybersecurity insurance companies have a tough time gauging the maturity of the program. It shows you how hard it is to maintain a really good program. And
but again, another initiative that these insurance companies are also providing is through existing customers, or as part of this, is providing them partnerships or means to
be
get
secure.
to that kind of right, like the bar. This is how high you need to start. Here's good starting points. Here's how you do that.
Because like insurance companies don't want you to get into an accident, right? They want you to be a good driver. They want you to not get speeding tickets. They want you to wear a seatbelt and be safe, right?
That's why I see this as one of the few kind of verticals in which a private company that is getting paid could make things much more secure in a quicker fashion. Like, this is something that every company almost has to have. And if they force people to do this, that's how we get like airbags, that's how we get seatbelts, that's how we get driving. Like, they have the ability to affect change. And I think if they do that in the right manner and they use this responsibly, I see them being able to contribute to to the overall security in a meaningful manner in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. That will conclude the show for this evening. Over and out.